Today's Word Balloon is brought to you by a new free app, Key Collector Comics. Key issues of comics are what make a collection exciting. Characters' first appearances, origins, iconic cover art, the first meetings or battles between two classic characters, the list goes on. Thankfully, you don't have to remember each and every one of these issues because there is a free resource called Key Collector Comics that has identified over 14,000 key issues and compiled them into one database on a free mobile app. But it's not just first appearances, second appearances, and classic storylines that Key Collector Comics provides information on. Did you know that George R.R. Martin, the writer of Game of Thrones, was first published in Fantastic Four 20 in 1963? He wrote a fan letter that made it into print when he was 15 years old. The legendary artist Alex Ross's first published cover art? For Now Comics in issue 1 of Terminator Burning Earth, published in 1990. Just a couple examples of the fascinating facts you'll find in Key Collector Comics, and without the uneventful issues that clutter other guides. It's like having all the needles without any of the hay. You can search by title, character, artist, writer, search variants, or browse hundreds of categories like movie homage covers and valuable second printings. There's also true price guidance that provides a target dollar amount for you to acquire an issue and have some profit built into your purchase. Key Collector Comics has been endorsed by Alex Ross and Neil Adams, to name drop just a couple of industry people, and it's available for free on the Apple App Store and Google Play, with an average rating of 4.8 out of 5 stars, out of thousands of reviews at Apple, Google, and Facebook. Check it out for yourself. It's pretty cool. Key Collector Comics. Terrificon is back. The Terrific Comic-Con, devoted to, what else? Comic books and their creators, returns to Mohegan Sun Expo Center in Connecticut. The 3-day event features the largest gathering of comic book writers and artists. The largest of its kind in New England is on August 9th through the 11th. Terrificon producer Mitch Halleck promises this year's event will be the best con he's ever produced, with today's top talent like Tom King, Donny Cates, Ryan Stegman, Clay Mann, Liam Sharp, Derek Robertson, plus legendary creators Jim Steranko, Chris Claremont, Jim Starlin, Jerry Ordway, and in his final con appearance, the one and only George Perez. Terrificon will be celebrating Batman's anniversary, as well as featuring actors from the Bat films, Billy D. Williams, Robert Wool, and Val Kilmer. Plus, Doctor Who's John Barrowman, The Flash's John Wesley Shipp, the voice cast reunion of Animaniacs, and Pinky and the Brain, and lots more. See for yourself why Terrificon is summer's hottest Comic-Con, this August 9th through the 11th, only at Mohegan Sun. For more information and guest list, visit Terrificon.com. It's terrific! Hey everybody, welcome back to Word Balloon, the comic book conversation show. John Suntress here, and I know I just released a couple episodes at the beginning of the week, but today marks the 20th anniversary of one of my favorite movies, Free Enterprise, a nice independent movie that came out in 1999, starring Eric McCormick, William Shatner, and Rafer Weigel. And it was directed by a good guy that is online, and I enjoy his work, Robert Meyer Burnett. Now, this was Rob's directorial debut. He and Mark Altman made this movie. They pitched it to Shatner. Shatner said yes. They got Eric McCormick really before Will and Grace blew up, and Rafer was brand new. Think of it as Swingers meets The Big Bang Theory. It's a great lost nerd movie because it was an independent production, and it found its audience on cable and on VHS and later DVD. It's on Amazon Prime. You can watch it for free. But given that it's the 20th anniversary, I've been meaning to talk to Rob and have another conversation with him. Rob's been on the show a few times, and we've shared our frustrations with Star Trek Discovery. Rob is an original Trekspert. He worked for Star Trek and Paramount Pictures in the 90s and in the 2000s. In the 90s, he worked on the Star Trek Experience at the Las Vegas Hilton, which was an incredible virtual reality ride, Star Trek Museum, and as you went through the museum, there are these amazing video montages of great Star Trek action scenes, and Rob produced those action scenes. He also did a ton of special edition work for DVDs like the Next Generation Blu-ray sets, and also on the Lord of the Rings movies, the X-Men movies, Superman Returns. We've talked about all that in previous conversations, but I wanted to get Rob back and talk about a few things. And Rob had some things on his mind as well, among them the culture wars, which he finds very frustrating, and I agree with him. And so I kind of let Rob, give his point of view on some of the things that have been frustrating him, both in the geek sphere and really just in general, in terms of the culture wars that American society faces today. And again, I share a lot of those opinions. But we do get plenty of geek talk in. We take a quick look at Star Trek Picard that's coming up later this year from CBS Access. We talk about the second season of Star Trek Discovery. There's a lot of recommended reading and recommended movie viewing in terms of various random movies that we both bring up and books that we bring up. Rob and I are about the same age, so we share a lot of memories of the stuff that we loved as kids, geek material over the years. And it was a blast. I always enjoy talking to Rob, and that's why I was happy to, let him speak his mind and get into our fun geek topics, but also hit some serious stuff as well. So I think you're going to enjoy this conversation, and I figured I'd drop it on the anniversary of Free Enterprise. Robert Meyer Burnett, director, YouTuber, and very fun guy on today's Word Balloon. This episode of Word Balloon is brought to you by Aftershock Comics, the industry's fastest-growing independent publishing company, prompting both new and established comic readers to read dangerously this year. As a publisher of many of the most talked-about independent titles of the past few years, including things like Marguerite Bennett's Animosity, Garth Ennis's A Walk Through Hell, and Jimmy Eats Bastards, Dark Arc from Cullen Bunn and Juan Doe, Donny Cates' Baby Teeth, Aftershock continues to push the envelope even further this year with new releases. We're talking about things like Descendant by Stephanie Phillips, Killer Groove from Ollie Masters and Owen Marin, Stronghold from Phil Hester and Ryan Kelly, Oberon from Ryan Parrott, Dark Red from Tim Seeley, just to name a few. Now, in the days and weeks ahead, we'll have more talks with Aftershock creators about their book, but you don't have to wait. Go to their website. You'll find full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on these books to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. Word Balloon is also brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Thank you very much, League, for your continued support. I just came back from the doctor, actually, just a couple hours ago, and things to continue to progress. My infection is still healing, and the wound that they had to kind of open up to scrape out the infection is slowly but surely improving and healing and closing and shrinking, but we still have some ways to go, and I thank you very much, League. You are the executive producers of Word Balloon, literally, in terms of helping provide the funding to keep Word Balloon going. Word Balloon is free. It'll always be free. And I'm happy to share it with the biggest audience as possible. But if you like what you hear here and you want to help support the cause, you can go to patreon.com/wordballoon, or you can click on the Patreon ad at wordballoon.com. But I thank you very much for your support, League of Word Balloon listeners. All right, Rob has been YouTubing since the end of December. We talk a bit about that right at the beginning of the show. He does a daily, 7-day-a-week show and talks about whatever the issues are of the day. He also reads fan letters and live streams and answers fans' questions directly. I am toying with that idea as well. And, if you're hearing this and you think I should be coming to you more frequently than I have been, I put out 11 episodes last month here at Word Balloon in May. And, with the downtime from radio, I'm able to produce more. But I am thinking, should I be on YouTube? Should we do Q&As via live stream? If you think so, either tweet me at John Word Balloon or write me a note on Facebook or, of course, email me at john@wordballoon.com. Those are the ways to reach me, and I'm interested in hearing what you think. If you think that would be something that would be worth your while as Word Balloon listeners, tell me what you think about that. But in the meantime, happy to spend some time, a good chunk of time, with Robert Meyer Burnett and what's on his mind these days. So here he is now on Word Balloon. Robert Meyer Burnett, welcome back to Word Balloon. As I was telling you off the air, I enjoy your YouTube show so much. I feel like we're having a one-sided conversation, and I know Word Balloon listeners feel that way when they finally get to talk to me directly. So thank you and welcome.
Well, to be honest, in a way, you had a little bit of an influence over me even doing the show. Because I really have done your podcast a number of times, and I've been a listener of your podcast intermittently. But as you know, I'm a huge fan of it, and whenever I get a chance, whenever I see that you're there in my live chats, the first thing I always do is promote the Word Balloon podcast. And it's very funny. I've noticed, like, I used to get called by my friends Kiss Ass Rob because I would always go up to people if I saw somebody that I admired or that I liked. I would gush profusely about that person to them. And then one of my friends recognized, he goes, you're not really Kiss Ass Rob. You're just Kiss Ass to people that you really like. That you're not just making it up. You can't fake that. And the thing is, there's a lot of weird things. Like I have a wide variety of interests. So there's people that I admire that you wouldn't even know that I would be paying any attention to them, because everyone's like, well, don't you just care about Star Trek and movies and action figures? And I'm like, well, there's a lot more. There's a lot more stuff that I'm interested in. But you're one of those people that I've always quite enjoyed your podcast. And of course, the people that you cover. I mean, you've been doing this for how many years now?
14 years.
Yeah. I mean, you've got a huge backlog. I mean, if you're interested in comic books and pop culture, you've talked to so many different people, and it's been great. Your podcast is great. So it was fun to see you come to my chats. I'm like, well, talking to you, because we would have these long conversations, and I'm like, I kind of like that. We could get into anything, and I in the back of my mind there was a bit of me that was like, I want to make this like the Word Balloon podcast.
Oh, that's really kind, man. And seriously, I as I told you the first time we met, I am a 20-year Rob Meyer Burnett fan, going back to Free Enterprise. Congratulations on the anniversary, and I hope you and Mark get to do some fun stuff with that publicly, and maybe at some conventions if you haven't already.
No, we haven't. I really would like to get the money to buy. Free Enterprise has basically been sitting on a shelf since 2006, since we put out the last DVD, and the world has changed, and I kind of want to do Free Enterprise the final cut.
Oh, interesting.
But I think I would have to buy the negative from Mark Gottwald, our very generous producer who paid for the whole thing. And I don't, taking a movie and putting it on Blu-ray is difficult when you're talking about a negative, because it costs about $100,000 to transfer negative to 4K, because you have to put the negative up. It has to be cleaned and properly scanned and then color corrected. There's just a lot of work to do. Then there's a lot of trims that I would want to get and go back in. I really want to re-edit Free Enterprise, not extensively, but just trim it up and make it a little bit more palatable. I don't want to change much. Fans of the movie wouldn't really recognize what's been done. It would just feel a little bit more contemporary. It was the first and only movie I've directed and edited, and I've just learned a great deal. I think I can really tune it up, maybe change the spark plugs out.
Sure.
And it's the 20th anniversary of its theatrical release is June 4th. So it's
happy anniversary. That's fantastic.
Yeah, in a mere 5 days. And it's interesting. June 4th represents many milestones in my life, in that, well, June 4th was, of course, the day Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, opened in 1982.
Yes, indeed.
Which I saw 4 times the day it opened at the John Dance Theater in Bellevue, Washington. And then June 4th, 1988 was the day that I arrived in California 31 years ago to go to USC, and then I've been here ever since, working in the entertainment business. So that is a huge milestone. And then coincidentally, Free Enterprise was released on June 4th, 1999 in LA and Chicago and New York, and for its limited theatrical run that nobody knew was happening, so it didn't make any money. And now, even it used to be a beloved cult film, but now it's just kind of forgotten. And the version that's streaming on Amazon is a 4:3 version from 1999. It's not even my preferred director's cut that I redid in 2006 for Anchor Bay. And it's frustrating. It's kind of this geek cult classic, depending on your point of view. It's either a geek cult classic or disposable garbage, as I've been told on both Amazon and on the IMDb.
Hilarious.
But yeah, it's
I'm sure it hurts a little, but I'm in the cult classic, because as I tell everyone, and I do point people to the Amazon stream just because it's there, and if they have Amazon,
right.
And I'm like, it's Big Bang before it was Big Bang, and I go, and also Eric is great in it, Rafer is great in it, and especially living in Chicago, Rafer is a Fox News anchor here in town. When we last talked, he was in St. Louis. And
yep.
I haven't been able to – I don't know if you still have a current email. I would love, if he would be willing, I would love to talk to him about Free Enterprise.
Oh, I bet he would love – you know what? I just talked to him on social media, but yeah, I'm sure he would. I mean, he's great. What's really interesting is I thought he was a really great actor, and he was the last person we cast. We cast him on a Friday, and we started shooting on Monday. And so he only had like 2 days to learn a script where he was in every scene practically.
Yeah.
And his father, of course, was Tim Weigel, who was a longtime sportscaster or sports broadcaster in the Chicago area
Absolutely.
for years and years and years. And he's sort of, when acting, it's tough to make it out here, but I think he wanted something more stable. And I know he went to work down in San Diego when he sort of left acting. Then he was with CNN for a while, and then he was in St. Louis, and now he's back in his hometown of Chicago.
Yeah, it's great. And actually, Tim's other kid, his daughter, has been a long-time news reporter.
Yeah, Jennifer?
As well. Yep.
Yeah, I love her to death. They're both great people.
Cool. That's cool.
Yeah.
No, I mean, and my background in broadcasting originally was sports radio for 16 years. So
right.
I knew Tim. Obviously he was on TV, and I mostly did radio. I did a little TV, but and that's why it's great. Now, Rob and I talk extensively about free enterprise in our first conversation, and I will direct people to that, and that's great because especially with the actual anniversary, the hard anniversary coming up, that's fantastic, man.
Right. It's kind of it's like we've come home. You and I.
Absolutely.
Full circle.
Too goddamn funny. No, and but like really, I thank you for all the plugs that you've given me on YouTube. And of course, I have been talking about your show as I've had people. I just had Jason Inman on, and we were talking about you positively and everything. And anytime.
Oh, I love Jason and his wife, Ashley. They're great. And, if I can plug, one of the things I like is their comic book Jupiter Jet.
Of course.
And they're always creating. They did another Kickstarter, and
yes,
I was plugging Ashley's new Kickstarter back on my show a couple months back. It was funny. It was on National Women's Day.
Oh, that's
I
great.
Actually was plugging her social media campaign.
Right.
Yeah,
science, which was kind of like she said, Harry Potter meets Starfleet Academy. Where it's like, well, you had me at hello. Good Lord.
Right, and they're delightful people. I was really impressed. I was dealing with Jason with the movie trivia schmodown that the schmoes know do. But Jason was a former serviceman, and he runs a yearly getting comic books out to the troops.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Rob. I just literally had him on to talk about super soldiers, and I intended. So I'm glad you're plugging this because I figured I'd do it in the intro to our conversation, mine and Jason's. But I meant to talk to him about it directly. So good. I'm glad you're bringing this up.
Yeah, I mean it's really great. What he was basically doing is he was getting comic book companies, and then he was getting people to also donate their comics, and he was distributing them to our troops everywhere, all over the world.
Yeah.
No, which I as a former serviceman, he is a former serviceman, and I thought that was great.
Oh God, he's literally like probably the most organized guy I know because he's doing he's working on the code for CBS as well, and I'm very proud of him. And in fact, I was telling him, I'm like, hey, I saw a couple of yours and Rob Schmodowns and everything. And he goes, I go, you're always good when you do your YouTube stuff or whatever. And he goes, no, I do more of it, but it's just keeping me from getting my other stuff done. And I'm like, no, I get it. I'm like, make the donuts. It's great to talk about the donuts, but make the donuts. I think that more satisfying. And again, you're like that as well. And I'm a broadcaster, I got to say, and I love what I do with Word Balloon. And again, I should take a page from both of you and get some of my other projects going. But I'm like I said, I told you off the air. It's been a good year, and I thank you for coming back. And we get a chance now to talk again about some new stuff. And it's funny. I wanted to ask you one thing, and that is about. Because you've said you've been a fan of pandemic movies over the years, and we were just briefly mentioning Andromeda Strain and the like. And I was telling you about my infection and everything. Now, I've never seen Outbreak, and I don't know why, because I like Rene Russo, and I just like the idea of Dustin Hoffman in an action movie.
Oh, Outbreak is a hoot.
Okay.
I mean, look, it's a little implausible.
Sure.
Obviously, because when the outbreak happens and I won't say exactly what happens, but it happens a little fast.
Okay.
But it's a lot of fun. Wolfgang Peterson directed it. To me, there's an entire, I don't know if you could call it a genre, but a type of movie that movie studios don't make anymore. And Outbreak was definitely one of those movies. And what I would say that they were mid-range or mid-level, budgetarily, mid-level, mid-range movies that would cost less than $100 million, between the $50 to $75 million range that studios were making from like the mid 80s to the late 90s. Yes. And I would consider movies like, say, Die Hard and Predator would fall into that category. The Hunt for Red October is one of those movies. Paramount was good at putting those movies out. The Tom Clancy movies, Hunt for Red October, Patriot Games, Clear and Present Danger, even Sum of All Fears. And Outbreak is a Warner Brothers movie. Outbreak is definitely one of those kinds of films, and I love those movies. Kind of globe-trotting, political thrillers or adventure thrillers, or in the case of Outbreak, a pandemic movie. I mean, what's really cool is I think it's on National Geographic now. The adaptation of Richard Preston's book, The Hot Zone, is just airing this week.
Yes.
A 3-night. Now, when I read The Hot Zone is a true story about an outbreak of Ebola at USAMRIID. I think it's at USAMRIID that was in Virginia, Reston. I think it was in Reston, Virginia, very close to Washington, D.C., where there was an Ebola outbreak within this facility on American soil. I think it was back in the 80s. And wow. Richard Preston wrote a book about it called The Hot Zone that Ridley Scott was going to make into a movie. This was back in the 90s, but Outbreak beat them to the punch. And the thing about Outbreak is it's an action movie.
Yeah.
Whereas The Hot Zone is a real medical thriller. It's more along the lines of something Michael Crichton might have written, but for real.
I'm with you.
And so they finally made it. Ridley Scott was going to direct that feature. It never got made, so they finally made it for TV. I have not watched it. It's this week. But between The Hot Zone and Chernobyl,
yes.
the Chernobyl miniseries, which is just incredible television. I mean, what's funny about Chernobyl, it's just another reminder of how other people I've known or worked with's careers had much more meteoric rises than mine has. Craig Mazin, who's the executive producer of Chernobyl and the writer, the impresario behind this show, this HBO miniseries, I worked with him in an ad agency in the 90s called Jacobs and Gerber.
Okay.
And he was a copywriter, and he was known for writing the copy on the Crimson Tide movie poster. Like he came up with the ad line, "Danger runs deep." That's what he would do. He's a copywriter. And he went to Princeton University, okay. Obviously. Yes. Very, very smart guy. And then I worked with him after Free Enterprise. I was a producer on a movie that we also made called The Specials, which was a low-budget superhero movie that's really hard to see now with a great cast that was actually written by and co-stars James Gunn from Guardians of the Galaxy fame. So James Gunn wrote this movie, The Specials, about it's either the 7th or the 8th greatest superhero team in the world, sort of real third stringers, and Craig Mazin directed it.
Wow.
So I work with Craig Mazin, who created Chernobyl, and James Gunn, who's doing Suicide Squad 2 now, but also did Guardians of the Galaxy, and on a movie. I was demoted because I left the company in the middle of the production after it was shot while it was in post. So I'm only an associate producer on The Specials. But if I had stayed, I would have been a full producer.
Well, go ahead.
No. So but it's great. Between Chernobyl and The Hot Zone, I'm like it. I love, if it isn't a horrible pandemic, like some raging virulent disease, like weaponized smallpox or something, which I will read any book or watch any movie that's about diseases. I don't know why. I'm not even a germaphobe. I read this great book. Well, I don't know how great it is, but I thought it was great when I read it. I read it in the 90s, and it's called The Third Pandemic. And it's by a guy named Pierre Ouellette.
Okay.
By the way, lives in Portland, Oregon, and he recently put out another book. He wrote a book called The Deus Machine, and then The Third Pandemic. And The Third Pandemic is about this disease. I don't even remember what the disease was, but what was so cool about this book, what I never forgot, is that throughout the book, each chapter would begin from a third-person perspective of watching this disease mutate. Like it starts out in a hooker in Brazil, and the John that she slept with traveled to Africa, and by going from her to Africa, the disease would mutate, and then of course it becomes this virulent, viral outbreak, this pandemic that spreads out across the world. And the climax of the book took place in Seattle. At least this is how I remember it. It was 25 years ago. And then Graham Masterton wrote a book called the guy who wrote The Manitou. And Revenge of the Manitou that the movie was based on. He wrote a book called Plague that I read at summer camp. And, of course, the granddaddy of all plague books is Stephen King's The Stand.
Indeed.
There's other books like Earth Abides and stuff like that, but I'll read any book.
Earth Abides,
and the sad part is that zombie fiction has sort of supplanted other good disease books. Nobody writes books about diseases because they're not ambulatory. They can't bite you.
But isn't that interesting? Because you're right about that, and I didn't even put two and two together like that. That you're right. What was okay with pandemics are now all zombie things. That's so funny.
Yeah. Or variations on a theme, like you watch a movie like The Girl with All the Gifts, and the zombie plague is really this it's a parasitic thing, like one of those insects that takes over an ant or something, or a wasp that gets taken over by some other parasite. There's all kinds of variations on. By the way, don't get me wrong, I was a huge Romero's Dawn of the Dead is one of my favorite movies of all time that just celebrated its 40th anniversary. Yep. And along with Alien and Star Wars' 42nd anniversary. But I just love pandemic books, but zombies, I love zombies, but they how many zombie books can you read?
Totally.
And zombie books are all they're all just parables or it's all about the collapse of civilization. Like, I'm convinced that the great thing about zombie stories, the reason that we love them so much, is because they're about, like, my greatest fear in life is that civility one day will end.
Yes.
One day people are just going to say, I'm not going to freaking stop at that red light anymore. Screw stop signs. I'm going to do whatever I want. And it begins there, and somebody will just come into your house, rape and murder your family, kill you, and we all live in the wasteland that's presided over by the Lord Humongous, the Ayatollah of rock and rolla, like in Road Warrior.
Exactly, absolutely.
And all civilization is stripped away.
Yes.
And that scares me. And we have a world where people will crash airplanes into the World Trade Center, and they won't offer a better vision of the future. They just want to, as Michael Caine said about the Joker in The Dark Knight, some men just want to watch the world burn. Yep. And we live in a world like that where, I love human achievement, and I love art, and I love civilization. I love the fact that the pyramids are here, and the Parthenon is still here, the Colosseum is still here, and I love all of these things. And I would like to think that in 1,000 years, our motion picture legacy will still be here. People can still listen to Led Zeppelin guitar riffs and Beatles songs and all of that. And yet we live in a world where there are factions of people that believe all of that should be burned away.
Yes.
And to me, then what good is humanity? I mean, I thought that we would be out moving amongst the stars eventually, and that we would stop thinking about ourselves in some tribal fashion and realize it's not about the global government. It's about the fact that we as the human species are special, and let's move out into the cosmos and see what's out there.
What do we want?
That's what I want. I mean, I'm never going to see it, but that's I've always believed in my fellow man, and I've always believed, despite the fact that human beings in our history have been basically awful people. You go back far enough, and every single group has been oppressed. I don't believe that we should exchange one oppression for another. We should all move forward as a species. One of my favorite things, I love reading horror fiction, and I've read a lot of it. I love horror novels a lot. That's where probably my disease thing is an adjunct of my horror love. But when I remember reading when Clive Barker first came on the scene and Stephen King was touting him in the 80s as the new, he wrote his 6 books of blood. And in the front of his book of blood, there was a quote, and it says, "Everyone is a book of blood. Whenever we're opened, we're read." And I was like, I love that idea because, people, we're racists and, we hate people of different colors. And I'm like, you know what? All you have to do to realize you shouldn't be prejudiced is just slit someone open from torso across, sternum, whatever, from the throat and open them up. Just like Clive Barker said, just open everybody, and every single person's going to be the same color on the inside. So if you start thinking about humanity sort of inside out, we're all the same.
Well, this is why we love Star Trek so much, because I'm only 2 years older than you, Rob, and it was plausible to think that, in 300 years, I mean, guys are up in space doing missions now, so yeah, in 300 years, we probably will be going to other planets and stuff. And yes, something like, and again, the Kennedy-esque utopia of the 20th century.
Camelot.
Yes, the Camelot of the 60s. No, so That's the thing. And isn't it sad? And I heard you say this, I think, on either with Campier or on your show or with the Midnight's Edge guys, somebody. But it's like, yeah, now that's kind of an alternate history. And I don't know if we see ourselves going there the way that we thought we did growing up in the 70s as you and I did and everything. So I don't know.
Well, yeah, it's sort of been – look, growing up as a Star Trek fan, I've always been an eternal optimist. I've always been a glass is half full kind of guy. And to me, most problems are surmountable. I mean, growing up, I was raised Jewish, and I met so many people with green numbered tattoos on their wrists. And I heard stories about concentration camps. And I remember reading Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. And I've always believed that we make our own meaning. And if you're interested in the world around you, there's so much amazing stuff to be a fan of. And whether it's like, it doesn't matter what it is, but like I'm sitting in a room that I'm surrounded by not only all my action figures and books and a computer system that's incredibly sophisticated that I edit movies on. It's just amazing. I have a smartphone that's basically a supercomputer, and I can talk to anybody around the world instantaneously. We're all carrying video phones in our pockets, and we live in such an amazing world. And I've done a bit of traveling, and the one constant that I've discovered is no matter where I've gone in the world, whether recently I was in South Korea, I've been to Bulgaria where I produced a movie, I've been to Israel, I lived in Australia and New Zealand. I've been to France and Germany and Denmark, all the places that I've gone. Most of the time, I've met people that are pretty cool. That's awesome. No matter where you go. Yeah. And this idea. I mean, I think the idea of warfare on a global scale is counterproductive. I think everybody knows that. I'm not really scared that we're going to have some nuclear conflagration because there's no money in that anymore. And now that we've got a global economy, it just ruins world markets. War is never good for world markets anymore because it disrupts. I mean, maybe once when you could do land grabs and you were, a depressed economy like Germany in the 30s, let's start a war machine and take over the world because they needed to give their population jobs. I mean, I could see that. It was like a great jobs program, the Third Reich. Nice. They just were a little misguided. Perhaps going into Russia and exterminating 12 million people, not such a good idea. Maybe, yeah. But now, I mean, we've got people like Jeff Bezos at Amazon, and we've got Elon Musk and other visionaries that want to go to the stars, and we've got probes on Mars, and Elon Musk launched a Tesla into space playing David Bowie, even though no one could hear it because it's a vacuum. But still, I mean, I do think, and at the same time, it's depressing to see how divisive politics is in this country and how we seemingly are going backwards, and how my side of the aisle, which I would consider myself to be a progressive leftist, the progressive left is now becoming science deniers, and it's weird. It's like
I haven't noticed that aspect, but go on.
Well, it's one of the things that like I'm obsessed with. Like, I'll give you an example. I had a lot of LGBTQ friends growing up. Okay. And never bothered me, never had a problem, always liked them. Because the thing is, you know what it's like to have LGBTQ friends?
They're your friends.
It's like having any other kind of friend.
Exactly. It's something exactly.
It's not like they sashay into the room and talk about their sex life. I mean, who does that?
I hear you, man.
I mean, it's like one of my oldest, dearest friends in LA. He's a gay man. I've known him for over 30 years, and it's not like, he'll share with me his dating adventures, but basically he's a big geek just like me, and we're bonded by our friendship of movies and science fiction and politics, and we sit around. I mean, it makes no difference to me at all.
I have friends just like that. I know exactly what you mean. Go on.
Right, and the other part of that is that it's been apparent to me since I was 13 years old that this is a naturally occurring thing.
Yeah,
this is not. Is just as natural as anything.
Yeah, man. No, I hear you, man. No, my dad was a Reagan Republican. Quick sidebar, and he came to that realization because he owned a bar and restaurant, and he had a gay couple that would come in, and he's like, they're good guys, and they're like the first gay people I've ever really met, and I was so proud of him because I was like 17 at the time. I'm like, Dad, you get it? That's great, and he was. Right. He's like, he goes, they mind their own business. He goes, go do your thing. That's totally fine. And I'm like, he gets it. Thank God. You know?
Yeah, and I felt that way about basically all the different kinds of people I meet.
Sure.
Look, I'll even talk to people that I'm on far different sides of the aisle in terms of religious belief and things like that. And I've always believed that the best way to learn is to listen to people that you don't necessarily agree with.
Yes.
And try and understand where they're coming from, because if you proceed from a baseline of we're all human beings, like we all essentially want the same things.
Yeah.
We all want to lead productive, happy lives, achieve our goals, fall in love, have families, be safe. We all want those things. And if you proceed from that baseline, then life is I'm sorry, the phone's ringing in the background. It's not my phone.
It's cool.
That we're human beings first and foremost, and we all can. If you go from that perspective, you can always find common ground with even the person that you might have the most vehement disagreements with.
No, man. No, yeah.
But to get back to things like one of the things that's fascinated me is the idea, and I've watched a lot of videos about this, is trans athletes, yes. Transgendered athletes, yes. And how trans women that have transitioned from being men to women, how they are competing in women's sports.
Yes.
And in track and field, especially.
MMA as well. I mean, I'm a boxing guy, and it hasn't happened purely in boxing, but I've certainly seen it in MMA, yeah.
Now, the World Powerlifting Association came out very strongly against having trans athletes, trans women compete against other women. And from a scientific standpoint, there's people that dispute this too, which I don't understand. I mean, men and women aren't the same.
Yes. No, I agree. And there you go. There's your leftists that are ignoring science. I hear you now.
Right.
Okay.
And it frightens me to know that it's one thing to want inclusion and acceptance and equality, but there are some things that we have to be mindful of that just shouldn't be happening.
I agree.
And I was watching this heartbreaking story of a female athlete, a cis female athlete. I don't want to dead name people, misgender people. It's like you have to wonder. I don't want to do that. I want to be accepting of people. And I whatever you, as I said, I believe that we know for a fact that people who are exposed to a lot of testosterone in the womb have differences in people who are not. Mm-hmm. So all of these things, I do not believe, for instance, that transgenderism is some kind of a curable affliction. I think it's an actual condition. I think people who are truly trans truly are.
Sure.
I do think that it's not dysmorphia. I really believe that people who feel that they're in the wrong body quite possibly indeed are.
Yeah.
And I think we just don't have the ways to measure it yet with our technology, but we will get there.
I hear you. Yeah.
However, that said, there are other biological concerns. There's a reason why men and women do not compete together in sports. Mm-hmm. They just don't.
Right.
That's why there's men's sports and women's sports. Yeah. And when you're talking about trans athletes, you're crossing a boundary that is it's nebulous at best. And even though if you're going to transition, I understand that taking hormones and testosterone things do change, but fundamentally in your DNA, it doesn't change. And I think what's interesting is and I think again it comes from a baseline of wanting to be inclusive and wanting to be have acceptance of all peoples and to look out for the rights of all. And I totally agree with that.
Sure.
But at the end of the day, science is science. And there are universal laws so far that we know that can't be broken, such as, hey, the speed of light. and when you start breaking down gender on certain levels, ultimately you're gonna bump up against DNA at the end of the day. You can drill down as far as you want, but you come up with DNA. What I find interesting is this is just one example. There's all kinds of examples of obviously people that are flat earthers or which look, you can build your own balloon and measure measure the world. And science works because I have my cell phone that I'm carrying around, and there's 100,000 different examples of how science works in my pocket. And to know, I know it works because it's amazing. It's amazing that I can do video calls around the world, and I can do video calls around the world because we have satellites orbiting the planet.
Right.
If the Earth was flat, my cell phone wouldn't work. And it's so strange that we're now living in this world. As a kid growing up, even I don't know if I told you this story before, but my grandfather used to give me savings bonds.
Okay, sure.
When I was a kid.
I got those.
And when I was like 13, when I was getting bar mitzvahed, my mom's like, these savings bonds aren't making any money. So she was going to cash them out because I got $500 for my birthday and $500 for the holidays. Okay. So I had like $13,000 in savings bonds if they made their final yield or however that worked. But my mom cashed them out, and she put our money into IBM.
Wow.
This was in 1980.
Fantastic.
Right? Oh, no.
Oh, no.
Oh, just wait. Just wait. So nothing was happening much in 1980 with IBM. It was like, I don't know, it was $54 a share or something. And a couple of years later, I want to say around the time when Return of the Jedi came out in 83, and my mom says to me, she goes, and my mom doesn't know anything about money or investing. She's like, you're not making any money in IBM. I'm going to put your money in oil.
Oh, no.
And I said to my mom, I'll never forget this. I go, Mom, you're not going to accept this analogy, but I want you to think about it. I was like, the Starship Enterprise does not run on fossil fuel. It's run by a computer. And I realized that this is a fictional thing, that Star Trek is not real. But science fiction concepts,
sure,
such as the computer. I mean, Colossus, the Forbin Project came out in 1970, and I understand that people were scared of computers. Demon Seed, Proteus,
yes,
raped Julie Christie in that movie in the mid-70s, had his baby. I live, according to Robert Vaughn's voice. I get it. Westworld, the original Michael Crichton 1973 Westworld.
Absolutely.
The robots revolted. Yes. I get that.
I mean, I like the HBO show, but no, I agree with you. That's a forgotten classic. The James Brolin, Richard Benjamin. Thank you. Absolutely.
For himself. And I was like, Mom, do not take my money out of IBM and put it in oil. Well, she did. And of course, it tanked. And of course, if you look at look at the earnings of IBM from 1980 to 1995,
oh, well.
take my $13,000. I'm like, hey, Mom, what's up? But that's the thing. I mean, and I see the idea that science itself and I get it. I think that identity politics, and there is a desire to have inclusion and representation now. But if you look at what's happening on college campuses, even my own college that I went to, the Evergreen State College, had this ridiculous student uprising. And I don't understand. You look at these students who are screaming and yelling on these college campuses, whether they're bitching about a professor that came out on, Yale, and talked about Halloween costumes and all that. It's like the students have paid money to go to Ivy League schools, and they busted their asses to get to their Ivy League schools, and yet they all believe that they know more than the faculty.
I hear you, man.
Of the very schools that they're paying to get into. I mean, you watch students talking about how they want their professors' jobs, and I'm like, what world do we live in?
No shit, man.
Like when I went to college, man, I knew that it was going to be an intellectually dangerous place. Yes. Now, do I believe that it should be safe so you can be unmolested and unfettered? Your physical person is to be safe on a college campus? 100%. Sure. I don't believe that a college campus should be a place where any kind of intellectual inquiry is stifled.
Completely agree, man. No.
You're supposed to go to college to learn. And the way to learn is to come up against beliefs that you don't either believe in or that you know about or that you might find offensive. Look, an idea is something that you examine. And if they're protesting certain college campuses or protesting speakers, like Berkeley used to be a bastion of free speech.
100%.
Now, like Milo Yiannopoulos, Milo Yiannopoulos is an agent provocateur that doesn't have a whole lot to offer.
Agreed.
All right?
Completely.
That will become apparent when you realize the emperor has no clothes.
Yes.
Let him speak. Let him speak, and if your belief system is strong, it will overcome those people that you believe are pernicious and horrible people.
Totally.
And that's, you have to let that kind of intellectual discourse, you have to let, whether it's butting heads, and we've forgotten how to do that. We've forgotten how to examine ideas, even bad ideas. And it's scary because bad ideas will eventually, like a viral pandemic, hopefully, will be destroyed by science, destroyed by medical science, the CDC, by Doctors Without Borders or whatever that are quashing Ebola outbreaks in Sierra Leone or wherever. I mean, that's what I would hope. That's what we're supposed to be doing. And now it's like I've never lived in a time where, and it's obviously because of the rise of social media, where's the discourse, man?
Yeah.
I've also found that if you travel around the places that I've gone, I've met a lot of people who have different ideas than I do. But when you're face to face, when you're working on a project, or you're actually in a room with somebody that you might have deep ideological differences with, but say you have to change a tire together, or you have to repair shingles on a roof of a house, or there's a job that needs getting done. Your political or religious or sexual or whatever ideology is not going to help you reshingle a house.
Right.
It's not going to help you change the tire. And the fact is, two people doing any of these tasks are better than one. And when again, it's about a baseline of having humanity. We're all Americans, and yet half of us hate the other half. And it's so weird. I mean, it's not like we're going to pick up arms against each other, or are we? Like it just is crazy to me. We live in a world where, look, we have really difficult, complex problems that we need to solve.
Totally.
And rather than screaming and yelling at each other over these petty differences that we have, and we really have to start thinking practically. Like, we live in a closed biosphere on this planet. Right. It's not like when you throw something away outside, just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's not going to be a problem. Ask any whale with a gut full of plastic. Yeah. And I just don't understand why we live in a world today where people are getting up in arms and screaming at each other on college campuses about their identity politics, when we've got CO2 emissions we have to deal with. We've got Pacific gyres where we've got parts of the ocean the size of Texas full of plastic.
Thailand is a dumping ground, isn't it? Thailand
is a dumping ground, the beaches. And it's like, it's funny, whether you're a climate denier or you don't believe in man-made climate change, I ask people, would you leave 10% of your kitchen dirty? Like, would you leave a pile of rotting dishes in your kitchen that cockroaches are crawling all over them, mold is growing over them? Would you leave 10% of your kitchen dirty? Most people would say no. Yeah. So why is it that we have an acceptable amount of arsenic in the groundwater? Yeah. Why are we rescinding environmental protections in view of, let's make some more money in the short term, but let's choke our planet to death and our biosphere, which is the only biosphere that we have? Yep. Why is that acceptable? Why are we as Americans not leading the charge to stop all kinds of environmental pollution of any kind? Like, it's amazing to me. I sit and think to myself, how many environmental catastrophe movies do you want to watch? It's just, I don't get it. And I find it fascinating that in my middle age, when I grew up watching things like Star Trek, where you had multinational crews, indeed alien crews, people coming together, the United Federation of Planets, where all of these planets that probably had to overcome these problems before they made it out into space came together in this great federation and are actually trying to make the universe a better place. I was watching this when I was 5.
Yeah, me too, man.
I thought this was obviously where we all wanted to go as humans. Like, isn't this where we want to be? And now I look at social media. I look at, we find today in Virginia Beach, moments before I got on this talk with you, 11 people were killed by a gunman at a municipal building. How many, like in America, it's just like,
yeah,
shootings.
Yeah. Thoughts and prayers. Yeah.
Thoughts and prayers. I actually, one of the things that I'm most proud of doing back in 2017, one of my oldest, dearest friends in the world, Dr. Michael Schertz, he's an MD, and he's an 18 Delta. He's a Special Forces medic. He's now an emergency room doctor in Oregon, in Portland, Oregon, and he teaches a class to first responders, to the military, to EMTs.
Yes, you've talked about him on the show before. Go on. Yeah. Go.
Yeah. We did a show called Crisis Medicine. You can go to his website. It's Crisis Medicine. Tactical Casualty Care.
Yes.
And we did it's a 50-hour, well, if you do the whole series, it's 50 hours of a lecture and programming where he basically is teaching pre-hospital care for people who are caught in active violent environments.
Wow.
Active shooter events,
Yeah.
building collapses, explosions. And so I directed, shot, edited, and even production designed this lecture series. And it's available online. It's like a master class. And there's like a day-long class, a 3-day-long class, and a 5-day-long class. And it's lectures, it's medical lectures. But I think everybody could benefit from taking the day-long class. And it teaches that if you're ever in an active shooter event and someone, whether it's yourself or somebody around you, has been shot, you can save lives.
Wow.
More so than just learning how to put a tourniquet on. It teaches wound packing, all kinds of things,
Wow.
moving casualties. And it's something I'm most proud of. I did it, but in 2017 we shot it, and then most of 2018 I was editing it because it was 50 hours of programming, and I did the whole thing myself. But it's online, and Mike does a really, really good job. He was teaching this all over the world. He was teaching it in the Middle East in war-torn areas, and teaching it to the military. And I was able to work with local SWAT. We went out in the field and did scenarios, and it was a wonderful thing, and it's something that I'm most proud of. But then I also am thinking, we did a 50-hour lecture series about people who can save other people, how to save your friends if they've been shot in an active violent event.
Yeah, fucked up.
That's why we did this show.
Yeah, because it happens. And it happens
'cause
too
it happens.
often. Yeah.
And we're like, look, man, I have to take off my shoes every time I get on a plane because some douchebag tried to light his shoes on fire on one airline plane, one plane flight.
Yep.
And all of us take off our shoes. There are people getting blown away even today. And it's not just one person or two people. It's like, here's half dozen, here's a dozen, here's 50 people in Las Vegas, or however many people were shot. And like, we don't do anything.
Yeah. No, I agree.
Because you know what?
Yeah.
We love our guns in America. We love our guns more than people. And to me, it's like, why wouldn't you make it hard to own a gun? Because if you really do want to own a gun, if it means that much to you, why not take a class? Why not go through a long process to get a gun? I had to take 6 months of driver's ed, man. What's more American than a muscle car, right? How come guns aren't exactly like cars?
Yeah.
There's nothing more American than driving around in your pickup truck with a big shotgun in the back. And yet the pickup truck takes a lot longer to get to drive than getting that shotgun.
That's a great point.
Why aren't they both the same?
Yeah. No, that's great.
What's more American than that? Or why not put driver's ed and gun safety together? So you learn how to drive and how to kill people in the same class. Why not do that? It's education. And who wouldn't want to learn to shoot? I learned to shoot at summer camp. I learned to shoot at YMCA's Camp Orkila. That was the first time I ever fired a gun, a .22 rifle. Can you imagine I'm at a summer camp and they taught you archery and how to shoot guns when I was 8?
Jesus.
Can you imagine those were the days, John. I could pick up a gun and fire a bow and arrow, a real bow and arrow. You learned how to knock your own arrows. Man, I was ready to go shoot elk when I was 8. I could kill people from 100 paces, both with a gun and an arrow. I was a wicked shot, too.
You and Ted Nugent, man. You could go.
And that was at the YMCA, the Young Men's Christian Association, Camp Orkila. My parents were awesome.
And they let a Jewish kid in. What the hell?
I know. Go figure. Well, I was adopted. I'm half Irish and half French, so I was a stealth Jew. I found out later.
Yes, my God, man. And that's another thing that came out on your YouTube. That's amazing. And it's so
I know,
cool that you connected with your birth mother and everything, man, and your birth family. That's wonderful.
Yeah. And then it's funny, for my mom's 80th birthday, I did a show when she was on.
Yes.
I interviewed my mom because what a spitfire she is. She
Hilarious.
plays 18 holes of golf 3 times a week. And she's like, I don't use a golf cart. I walk. Like, you go, Mom.
That's fantastic, man. No, I agree. And it's funny because sadly, as you say, it is something that we're experiencing now in our country. And this is a good way to transition to a lost film that I have not thought about, or I haven't seen, I should say, since it was out in, I think, 1979. A Sean Connery film, Wrong is Right.
Yeah, it was after 79. Okay. I think it's 84.
Wow, was it that late? Really?
Wrong is Right is not available. It's not available on Blu-ray. That's not the greatest movie in the world, but Wrong is Right. I loved Wrong is Right.
Well, it presaged kind of our terrorist era and obviously it was happening globally. But I mean, am I right? I mean, I only saw it the one time in the theater because it was Sean Connery. Of course, didn't realize I was going into a kind of a parody, and I kind of assumed it is like one of those lost films that has slipped through the cracks. Yeah,
it is, because I'm looking at DVD Talk. It did come out on DVD on March 16th, 2004.
Okay.
And the movie came out in 1982, and it says, Richard Brooks' film Wrong is Right is an ambitious satire of the news media, government conspiracies, U.S. Middle East relationships, political campaigns, and covert arms dealing. Talk about a movie that's prescient. I mean, come on.
Straight, man.
I mean, come on.
Yeah, did a studio make it? Was it independently made?
I believe it was Sony. Well, it was Columbia Pictures.
Okay. Wow.
And, the movie's not great.
No.
But I liked it, and it's crazy. It says the script. This is in the review again. This review is from DVDtalk.com. The script, at least as far as Connery's character is concerned, is structured as a mystery, with the reporter trying to unravel the suspicious death of King Awad and his relationship with Unger. I guess that's Connery's character. Unfortunately, most everything is revealed to the audience long before Connery's Hale realizes what's going on. I guess Unger's the president. Always several steps behind, he's trying to figure out the things the audience already knows, giving the film an unusually high get-on-with-it quotient. Yeah, but you know what? We now have the head of Saudi Arabia killing a journalist that was from America, and our president going, yeah, it's okay.
Yeah, he's a good guy. I wouldn't worry about it. Yeah. That's okay. Yeah,
I mean, what's amazing to me is, and we give it a pass. We give that a pass. Our president basically is a condoning murder.
Yeah, but Rob, we're powerless. I mean, that's the thing, man. And sadly, the obvious of half of the government saying, "Well, he's our president, and we're going to stand by him even through all this bullshit." And I mean, good Lord. But again, that's why, as I said, and Deal of the Century is not a great movie. The Chevy Chase movie, right? The arms dealer movie. But again, it's like, boy, you could do a festival of, hey, guess what they were presaging 20 years ago or 30 years ago now or 40. Good Lord.
But you know who directed Deal of the Century?
I don't remember. Tell me.
William Friedkin, director of The Exorcist, The French Connection, Sorcerer. And by the way, Arrow Video, Home Video, Arrow, one of my favorite video companies in the world, just announced they're releasing the Blu-ray of his movie, Cruising.
Oh, the Pacino movie.
I mean, I'll tell you a funny story. Talk about LGBTQ. Cruising was set in the gay leather underworld in New York City in the late 70s. And it's based on a novel. And it had a very difficult time getting made.
Yes.
And it was shot in very authentic locations with very authentic extras. Now, my father insured Jerry Weintraub, who started Concerts West, and then he became a movie producer. Yeah. He produced like the Ocean's 11 movies.
Yes.
The new Well, Jerry Weintraub produced Cruising too. And my dad took me. He goes, well, Bobby, there's this movie called Cruising. It was directed by the guy who directed The Exorcist, which at the time, by the way, I hadn't seen yet. But my dad, I was a movie fanatic even as a kid. So my dad's like, Cruising was 1980. I guess that was the same year I got The Exorcist, or I saw The Exorcist for the first time. Okay. So my dad took me to a screening.
Oh, Cruising.
And boy, was that fun. Because Jerry Weintraub, my client, produced this movie with Al Pacino, The Godfather. Sure. It's called Cruising. Yeah, it's
probably all about cars. It's about muscle cars. It'll be great.
And I was perplexed, to say the least.
You're like Bart Simpson with Homer. Dad, why'd you take me to a gay steel mill? I don't know.
I mean, it was very interesting because, my dad, I was a precocious kid. I knew around 5 that I loved women and all that. But boy, my dad and I had a very awkward conversation about the leather scene in New York City after watching Cruising.
Wow.
Not that my dad, a pretty vanilla Jewish guy from who was the vice president of an insurance company, could really explain. Like, it was so funny because he wanted to leave immediately when he found out what the movie was about.
Sure.
Like, and I didn't want to. I mean, I was fascinated by it. And to me, I looked at it as a like I was watching almost a science fiction movie about an alien subculture that I didn't really know or understand.
Yeah.
But because at the time, you know, I did understand what being a gay man meant, because I had some older friends that were gay. And the funny thing was, my parents growing up, they never had a bad word to say about anyone. I never remember my parents ever saying anything mean or derogatory about anybody, anyone, not my friends, not their friends, not anybody in the world. My dad was the opposite of Archie Bunker.
Okay.
But it's not like, you know, he was down with the leather daddy scene, the
exactly.
bear scene in New York, you know, and it was funny because I'm like the inquisitive kid. I'm like, so Dad, there's some things I don't understand. And that was one uncomfortable conversation for, and my dad's name was Dick Burnett. You'd think he'd be okay, I can talk about this, but apparently he couldn't. That night he was just simply Richard Burnett, or maybe Dad.
That's fantastic, man. You're killing me. See, again, like Wrong is the Right, like Cruising, in fact, I never saw it. I'm a huge William Friedkin fan. Chicago's very own. Started off in Chicago journalism before he got into filmmaking. Attaboy, you knew that. No, I mean...
Yeah, well, he came out of, as a matter of fact, there were actors that he would use. I mean, it was him. Michael Mann was another director, came out of Chicago.
Absolutely.
But no, and it was. I'll tell you guys, and I'll tell you something that's interesting that I actually did not believe. But when I was at USC, William Friedkin came to speak, and he was talking about his career, and he was talking about Cruising.
Okay.
And he was talking about his problems with the ratings board.
Sure.
And things that he had problems with in the past. And he was talking about how he showed the ratings board Cruising and specifically the murder scenes in Cruising.
Okay.
And you see these close-up shots of they're very quick. And William Friedkin said there are actually scenes of close-up hardcore anal intercourse that are intercut between each stab of the knife in the murder. And I was like, come on. And of course I had Cruising on VHS. So I went home and sure enough, he was not incorrect. And I was stunned because, you know, there was a lot about subliminal stuff that went on in The Exorcist, and it's more overt in The Exorcist. But I was like, how could he have done? And it'll be interesting to see, because I know he's remastered Cruising, and I know Warner Brothers put out a DVD, but I'm curious to see the Blu-ray. But I was surprised. I mean, I was like, wow, you can really get away with a lot with subliminal use of quick cutting. As an editor, I haven't been able to avail myself of that kind of editorial masterwork or magic, but that always did make an impression on me.
That's amazing, and I wonder if he did kind of eliminate those when he remastered it. You know, I appreciated your conversation, and it's something that I've discussed with friends about Disney and their decision about Dumbo and the crows scene from the original movie.
Right.
And I guess we are boring, because I do agree with you on that as well, that it's important for that stuff to continue to be exposed contextually, and that it's okay to have these. It's like you said, how do you learn what are bad ideas or bad behavior? I mean, how do you know good stuff if you don't see bad stuff and you don't talk about it? And I agree with you, too, about what you were saying before about campuses and stuff. Tony Hendra, the guy who played Spinal Tap's manager and a longtime National Lampoon Radio Hour and comedy album maker and everything, he has revived the National Lampoon brand, or whoever owns it got smart and made him part of it. And he's doing audio sketches the same way that he did on the Radio Hour and on the albums. And one of his first albums was called "Are There Any Triggers Out There Tonight?" And the umbrella concept between each sketch was that they were performing at a community college, and they would shout out things, and of course the students would respond back angrily and editorially. And also, I'm glad you pointed out on your show the Tracy Ullman BBC comedy sketch she did about the group therapy for woke people.
The woke therapy group. Well, what's funny, and there was somebody that I've worked with and know that came after me and goes, "Oh, great, you think it's cool that you're making fun of people that are only looking for social justice." And here's the thing. We were talking about before we went on the air, one of the people that I have become a huge fan of. I mean, I find these thinkers, these people that I read their stuff or I see them on YouTube or something, and I become fans of theirs, and I read everything that they do. And one of the people that I've most recently become a huge fan of is a gentleman named Noah Yuval Harari.
Okay.
And he is an Israeli historian and philosopher, and he wrote this book called Sapiens that was sort of a hot book, but it's basically a book about human history, where we've come from. And his basic contention is that where we are right now, humanity is in a better state than we've ever been. There is more inclusion. There is more representation. People are living longer. We don't have to worry as much about famine. People are better educated. That humanity is in the best state it's ever been. People are living longer. Now, does that mean that our job is done? Clearly not. We have a long ways to go. We're rescinding abortion laws. We're doing all kinds of crazy stuff. But then he also wrote another book after that called Homo Deus, that's all about the history or the future of mankind. And the question he asks at the end of his book, by the way, I urge every listener that you have everybody go get Noah Yuval Harari's book, both of his books. They're usually sold together on Amazon at a discount. Get Sapiens and get Homo Deus, because first of all, they're wildly entertaining books to read. But basically, he covers the first 100,000 years of human history in Sapiens. And then he asks the question at the end of the book, what do we as a race, what does the human race want? What do we want? And then in Homo Deus, he starts examining the future technology that is right. It's not really future. It's right around the corner. The ethical and moral decisions that we're going to have to make, especially in terms of bioethics and gene splicing and CRISPR technology and everything that we have coming down the pike. And Homo Deus is all about that future. And when I read his book, when I read Sapiens and I got to the end, it really put the zap on me, because I was thinking, well, what do we want?
Sure.
Like for me, I've always wanted to make movies. My whole jam has been storytelling.
Yeah.
Like, I love people. I love all kinds of people. And I always end my YouTube show by saying, remember, every person that you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen.
Amen.
And I believe that. And I, one of my great simple joys in life is talking to my Lyft drivers. I take Lyft all the time. Sure. Cut down on, and I have these great conversations with my Lyft drivers. And I met this guy. He was a Lyft driver, but as with most people in LA, when you're a Lyft driver, you're doing a million different things. Usually, like me, I might be editing a feature film one day, or I'm talking on YouTube. It's you just never know. So I met this guy.
Absolutely, man. Yeah.
And it's funny. I want to see if I can find his name. You know what? I can't. I wrote his name. I wrote his name down. Okay. But I wrote his name down. But he told me something very interesting. Through his work, through his art, and through what he chose to, he was, and he's a African American guy. Okay. He's fairly young. He looked around early 30s or something. Very articulate, smart dude. And he said to me, he goes, through the work that I'm doing, where I'm coming from is my work comes from a place of where I want the world to be. Like, I'm going to do work from the future where I think there is more inclusion, that there is more racial equality, that there is less tumult in the world. My work is all about that place, and I am approaching the way I lead my life, and specifically how I do my work, that we're already there. Okay. So through the example of his work, he's showing us a better world. And I was like, I put the zap on my mind. I was like, wow, man. I mean, so you're not an activist, but you are, in the sense that you're showing us the possibilities of where you think we should be already, and you're not angry about where we are. And he said to me, why do that? If I wanted to go back and look into my own history, all I would have is anger. And I was like, man. And I've often told people that, we don't know what it's like. If you're a black man or a black woman in the United States, you never, ever have ever had real equality.
Right.
Never.
Right.
And we, as much as you want to say, well, you people, whatever, you don't know what it's like to, let's say you want to go in and you come back from a club and you realize, oh man, there's no 24-hour grocery stores, and I really just need toothpaste and toilet paper. Yep. And if you're a black person in the United States and you walk into a 7-Eleven at 2:00 in the morning, it's a different experience for you than if I walked in as a white Irish Frenchman with Irish French descent. And when I walk into a convenience store at 2:00 in the morning, it's a different experience, and you have to worry. You don't know what it's like. Cop pulls me over. I'm like, God damn it. Cop pulls them over. They don't know what's going to happen. And we don't know what it's like. But he was saying that to me. He goes, do I want to? I would rather show people through my own work the way it could be, rather than the way it is, because lots of people talk about the way it is. And I thought that was incredible.
That's awesome.
I had an experience. I don't think I've ever really – I was in South Korea working on a documentary last year, and I was in Seoul, and I was able to go to the Olympics, and we drove around. We went to this military base. But wandering around Seoul, which, by the way, I really had a good time in Seoul, and I really met a lot of great people there. But – there's not a lot of racial diversity in Seoul unless you see American service people. And I had never been, because mostly I'd been places, Western Europe or Commonwealth countries like New Zealand and Australia, which I lived for years at a time in. But going to Seoul, it's not like you could read the signs, and it's not like you just walk in and go, hey, what's up, man? I'd like to order this. And it was for the first time in my life, I realized, wow, this is what it's like to know you're an outsider.
Interesting.
And it was very apparent to me, and it was also because I was also looking for it, but it was something that I was noticing, and wherever I went, I was tall and I'm loud, and it's just a different mindset, sure. And you realize that, man, this is what it's like. This is what people who come from different places and come to America, and if you have if you look different than somebody, it's easy to, whether you're being profiled or whatever, and we do carry our prejudices with us everywhere we go, that it can be really, really hard. Yeah. And I think that we are not mindful enough. If we just hold your roll, just take a breath and just think about other people. Like, you walk out into the world, everybody expects the world to bend to be the way they want it to be. Mm-hmm. And really, it's not. The world is a cruel, heartless place. Yep. And it doesn't care about you. It doesn't care about your feelings. And when you walk out into the world, it's up to you to bring civilization with you. Yep. and I believe that. It's like you bring civilization with you, and you sit down, and hopefully you will meet other like-minded people, and you can all create civilization together, because that's what we as human beings should be doing. And what better people than Americans to do this? And yet we can't even get our own country into a place where people can stand in a room together of all different shapes, sizes, colors, creeds, and beliefs and sexualities and have a conversation now.
Yeah.
Well, what's up with that, man?
And it's invaded.
And
it's invaded the geek world, and that kind of bums me out. And that's been as you've talked about as well, the sad puppies and the honey badgers. And it's Rob. This is where it's but. Because, and I am interested in what you think, because as you were saying all that, I agree with you. I think it is important to hear other points of view. The Comicsgate people specifically kind of frustrate me, because I'm okay with them wanting a type of story and everything, but I think they're already getting it. And they're saying, well, I don't want to read about a transgender superhero or about even a female superhero or whatever. And it's like, well, you don't have to. And that's what keeps me from engaging much with them on Word Balloon, frankly, is and occasionally I get some very thoughtful letters for people who lean towards that feeling of, hey, I don't need a social agenda pushed to me by Marvel or DC. I just want to read good comics. And it's like, yeah, but I think there are other, I don't think every comic book is doing what they're claiming these companies are doing, title wide, where the entire line is doing that, and so there's my own little, like, I don't know if I'm practicing what I preach by not having Comicsgate people on Word Balloon.
Well, here's what I don't understand. Like one of my favorite YouTubers is a trans woman named Natalie Wynn, and her station is called ContraPoints. She was a former PhD student. She's wicked smart, and she makes her videos are really well done, wildly entertaining, and she's just, to me, devastatingly intelligent. And she also does a pretty good job of talking about both sides of an issue. Okay. I mean, she calls out douchebaggery when she sees it, but her videos and lately, I mean, she had some, I forget what she called it, but it was basically facial beautification surgery, and she showed it. Wow. She showed her face messed up, and before and the after. By the way, she looks great, and I have mad respect for her and how she deals with the issues. And, she covers a lot of topics. Like, I have no idea what it's like to be trans, sure. But the way she covers it, it's and she doesn't just she's very campy, but not campy. She's slyly campy. I watch all of her videos. Like, when I discovered her, I watched everything. And she talked about before she began her transition, and then now watching it happen. I'm like, fascinating stuff. Okay. And I completely respect her as an intellect, as a human being, as a fellow YouTube creator, just as one of the most fascinating people, I think, in the YouTube space, who also is courageous, but more than anything, really, really smart. And listening to her commentary, I feel that I've learned a great deal. Now, I can't believe that somebody – I mean, she gets a lot of guff, sure. But I think to myself, you know what? Everybody should listen to her. If you just sit down and open your mind and listen, and I'm thinking, why shouldn't we have all kinds of people, whether you're straight, whether you're gay, whether you're trans, whether you're a communist, whether you're a conservative? I mean, who cares if you're going to tell your stories and you're going to be smart about it, and all we can do is learn from other people. Yeah. Why is that a bad thing? And how is that threatening you and the stuff that you like and the stuff that you want? I just don't understand. I mean, like I said, like I always say, every person you meet has a story to tell you haven't heard. Why not listen to how is there? I remember I had a housemate and I lived with her for 5 years. She actually won a house by playing a game show on TV, but I can't remember the game show. She wanted a roommate. It was right after I got divorced, and I moved in. I thought it'd be a couple months. 5 years later, I left. But she would sometimes get mad about the neighbors or say sometimes disparaging things. And I would say to her, I'm like, hey, we had lived on a very nice street, and the neighbors were nice, bucolic, okay. Trees, manicured lawns, very nice, suburbia. And I was like, what what your neighbors have done in the privacy of their own home, has it ever affected you or the neighborhood or anything in your life? And she reluctantly said, well, no. And then I'm like, so what does it matter? Like, why would you even, aside from they're nice, one time the people that lived across the street, their 8-year-old daughter called her mother and reported me. She didn't know it was me. I was actually outside my house at the bottom of our driveway, face down on my stomach, setting up a 12-inch Carl Urban bootleg Judge Dredd figure that I just got in the mail from the Monkey Depot, because I get a lot of figures from the Monkey Depot. And I was taking pictures that made it look – it was a forced perspective shot that I was getting of Judge Dredd protecting my neighborhood. Because I was so impressed with this figure. So I'm doing a little action figure photography, and this 8-year-old girl from across the street actually called her mother and said, Mommy, there's a strange man lying on the street taking pictures of a doll. Well, yeah. And so the mother calls my housemate, and my housemate listens to this story and goes, oh, no, that's just Rob.
That's just Rob.
He probably got a new figure. I mean, that was as much as that was. That, by the way, it's a true story. I think the picture's on my Instagram. Follow me on Instagram. It's RM Burnett. But it was like that was the most in the 5 years I lived there. That's the only bad. It wasn't even bad. It was hilarious, and my housemate thought it was the most hilarious thing in the world. But I was just outside with my little action figure, and I can't imagine what it looked like seeing a grown man playing with a Judge Dredd figure, a 12-inch Judge Dredd figure on the street corner, and then bringing out his phone and taking pictures of it.
Totally.
Normally, when strange middle-aged men are taking pictures of things, they're dolls. It's something else.
Absolutely. They're in their basement, not doing it out in public and everything. Yeah, man, I'm with you.
Yeah, and it was so funny because I was off in my own little world.
Sure.
It's like when I walk outside, I'm painting a flying model rocket.
Okay.
You're there, and I'm painting a model rocket with a spray can. You have to walk out. Yeah. It never occurs to me that people look at me and go, "Why is that? Why does that? What is that guy doing?" Adult. Because when you're painting a model rocket, you can't see you just see this cardboard tube and you're holding it up. It doesn't look so good. Like, what are you painting? What is that you're painting? I'm like, oh no, it's a rocket. People are like, oh sure, I'm sure it is a rocket. Where is that going to go? But when you're a middle-aged geek, these interests sometimes trip you up.
Do you own drones?
You know what? I don't.
Neither do I.
And a lot of my filmmaker friends have drones, and they're badass. Sure. And I love drones. I mean, I worked on I was shooting behind the scenes on Leah Thompson's directorial debut. Leah Thompson, the girlfriend in Back to the Future.
Hell yeah. Well, the mom
in
Back to the Future, but yeah. Well, I guess you're right, technically, and
Caroline
in the City, and of course Howard the Duck.
Yeah, Caroline in the City, and Some Kind of Wonderful, and all that.
Awesome.
Yeah,
the Duck, of course.
Well, I was shooting behind the scenes on her directorial debut, the Year of Spectacular Men, that was written by her daughter, that also starred in the movie. And the team there, they had a lot of, because there was a lot of outdoor stuff, and the team was using drones, and I was really impressed. I mean, most movies now have drone shots in them.
Yeah.
And they're fantastic. Like, I just haven't. I know that if I bought a drone, I'd want to spend a couple grand, and I would take it everywhere, and it'd just be a big pain in the ass. And the fact that you can control drones from your iPhone,
insane.
It's amazing. And you can spy on your neighbors. And I live close to a freeway, so I'd want to fly the drone over the freeway and get shots of the busy 210 skimming over the tops of people's cars. That probably wouldn't go over very well, but it'd be something I'd like to do.
No, that's fantastic. No, and again, you and I grew up with radio controlled boats on little ponds and things like that, and of course airplanes. And I never had the airplanes that you put gas in and had these, whatever lines that you could fly and everything, but my cousins had all that.
Cox. Remember that was Cox airplanes? Yes. Cox, COX. And you'd have the gas engine, and you'd spin it around your head and it would fly. My grandmother also bought me because we're from Seattle, we had unlimited hydroplane races. So there were companies that would they were made basically out of balsa wood or little small plywood. I built wood. I built the Atlas van lines. I built a radio control, the wood Atlas van lines that was piloted by Bill Munsey, and my grandmother got it for me, and it was a little radio controlled boat that you could put on Lake Washington.
Yeah.
And it was I was into. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, I still, now we live in a world where companies make all these model kits that I wanted to buy. Like Mobius just put out the EVA pod from 2001.
Yes, I've seen you talk about it on the show.
It's oh my God, it's amazing. And now I've been buying all the secondary market parts. I haven't built it yet, but but nowadays, would kids build a 1/72nd scale perfect model of the Millennium Falcon that would take months to paint and build correctly, or would you just go play Battlefront on PlayStation 4 where you can actually fly a photorealistic Millennium Falcon? What would be the point of building a model of the Millennium Falcon when you can now fly one and blow shit up? I mean, it's a different world.
Hilarious. You're 100% right. That's hilarious, man. You mentioned where I want to say, was it Where Eagles Dare the other day?
Yeah.
On your YouTube.
Today on the show, somebody wrote me a letter about it, and then I tweeted. There was a great article that I found on Facebook about Where Eagles Dare. And Where Eagles Dare, it's this great widescreen World War II movie that stars Richard Burton and Clint Eastwood. It kicks ass.
From the 60s, late 60s, yeah.
Yeah, Alistair MacLean,
yes.
1968. And he wrote the screenplay, and he came up with the story. And, it was funny because Alistair MacLean, he wrote like The Guns of Navarone. And I remember he was the first author I remember hearing a radio ad for his book.
Oh, sure.
And it was a book called Goodbye, California that I actually read, and about earthquakes.
Okay.
And I was like, Alistair MacLean, he was that popular. He was such a popular novelist that he got a radio advertisement for his book. That was just the first one I remember hearing.
That's hilarious.
Hearing about.
Yeah, I remember those the first time I heard those in the 80s. I know, man. I know that feeling. Well, it's funny because one of the encores this week was showing Midway from 76, I want to say. And, it's so funny, and again, something that I knew you would relate to, being such a movie buff and everything. I find myself now watching those very late 60s, 70s World War II movies. You mentioned Patton. Patton's on it. To me, it's on a level on its own. I mean, that's right. A great exception. But some of these kind of more vehicles that were coming out and kind of, just these international casts, and especially by the 70s when the genre was kind of getting a little old and everything. But, I haven't sat down to watch it yet. But good Lord, you got Henry Fonda, you got Charlton Heston, Robert Webber, of course Mitchum is, I forget the Admiral's name and everything that he plays.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, it's this great all-star, like, late 70s movie. And I'm like, I find myself revisiting a lot of those movies that didn't speak to me as a kid. Mitchum's two Marlowe movies. And they're not perfect movies, but they're interesting. And I really enjoy watching a lot of the Hollywood greats in their final years cranking shit out. In fact, I had Robert Wool on earlier in May, and we talked about his film Mistress. And I'm like, tell me about Eli Wallach, man. Good Lord. What a genius actor, and what an interesting career and everything. He's like, it was incredible.
It's funny that you talk about that movie. A girl I used to date, this girl Mary Forrest, was obsessed. She gave me that laser disc. She's like, this movie is a favorite of mine, and I'd never even heard of it. And I still have the Laserdisc. So that movie, it's wacky that you bring that up. By the way, I just want to interject. I just looked this up. Sure. So Goodbye California came out in 1978.
Oh wow!
And what's funny is I've got to read the plot. Set in the United States, an Islamic terrorist kidnaps nuclear scientists and steals radioactive material from a California nuclear power plant. When Detective Sergeant Ryder's wife is kidnapped along with nuclear scientists from the California power station where they all work, he sets out to find her. Facing resistance from within his own police department, he leaves his job and begins taking the law into his own hands. His son, Jeff, a highway patrolman, and a few other trusted friends attempt to stop the terrorists from detonating home-built atomic bombs along California's fault lines.
Perfect.
I mean, come on. And that was how growing up as a kid, I would have been 11. And I remember I bought the paperback of Goodbye California, and that's when I read it. And how could you not? Like when you're a kid, you listen to that on the radio. What sounded better than a book about nuclear terrorists? And this is the same year that what did Lex Luthor do? Wanted to put nuclear bombs in the California fault lines. Superman the movie. So back then in 1978, it was really in the zeitgeist. Let's blow up California.
Hilarious. That's fantastic, man. That's amazing. Do you find yourself like watching other old movies that you didn't consider before, and now do you ever do any of that?
Oh, dude. It's so funny. Okay, this is crazy to me because I'm just looking up works by Alistair MacLean. Ice Station Zebra.
I didn't know he wrote that. That's fantastic. I love that.
He wrote the Satan Bug.
I remember Satan Bug.
Where Eagles Dare, Force 10 from Navarone, Breakheart Pass. I mean, the guy, I look at all of these adaptations, the Guns of Navarone, the Satan Bug. John Sturges directed Satan Bug, who directed like John Sturges is powerhouse men's men director.
Bonds, Great Escape.
Yeah, Great Escape, and
Seven.
And I find myself going to watch these movies because they're all about men.
Yes,
adult men. And it's such we don't live in that world anymore. I even go back and watch like Elliot Gould playing Philip Marlowe in The Long Goodbye. Robert Altman's The Long Goodbye. I love watching movies about adult dudes.
Sure.
That as a kid, because not genre movies and not necessarily I mean, I love World War II movies, but The Great Escape bored me when I was a kid.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
It wasn't until I got it on Laserdisc when I was like in my teen years, like 16. And like, I think it came out, Criterion put out a Great Escape version on Laser. I loved it. Like, it wasn't until in my teen years I really started my film education. I really started watching these movies and going back and going, oh my God, I mean, I've never seen this. I got to watch this. Why does everybody talk about Lawrence of Arabia? And why does everybody talk about The Great Escape? And these were not, but when I was able to get access to them on VCRs and then Laserdiscs, I would watch these and I loved them all.
Sure.
You know, and the same was true of like the Western genre.
Yes.
I was never a fan of the Western genre until I started. Well, it's funny enough, I started watching Westerns. I was like, wow, like I finally watched The Searchers. I remember the first time I watched The Searchers, I'd woken up, I crashed at a friend's house. It was my first year in California, so it was in '88. Never saw The Searchers. I heard about it because Jeffrey Hunter's in The Searchers, who was Captain Pike on Star Trek.
Absolutely.
John Wayne. And for some reason, we were at a party. We partied at my friend Sean and Kelly's house, and I woke up at like 6:30 in the morning, probably hungover, and turned on the TV, and there was The Searchers, like just starting on cable, whatever it was, cable, HBO or Showtime or something. And I'm like, well, it's on. I'll watch this. I've never seen it. I was riveted. Yeah. I was just riveted. I'm like, oh my God, this movie's great. You know, and what's going to happen? Are they going to find this girl? What's going to happen when they do? Like, I was totally riveted. And then I went back and started watching all kinds of Westerns and John Wayne. And you know, it's funny. John Wayne was a great fucking actor.
Oh, no, you know, I agree with you, man. Not a great human being, but a great fucking actor. Absolutely, man.
Right. And you know, and you hear about, his right-wing policies. I mean, even now, John Wayne would have been run out of Hollywood, I feel.
Rob, if you remember, a few months ago, they unearthed that Playboy interview he did in the early 70s. And it got, as I've told you, in fact, I know I gave you the comment on your YouTube show, retro shaming. And it's like,
right, I love that. I love the idea.
I know,
of
I got to
shaming.
trademark that.
I mean, I don't love the idea of it, but I love the term because you know how is it that like we had Jim Crow laws in the United States in the 60s?
Yes.
I mean, we had Jim Crow laws. Yes. And, you know, you go back and if you were going to meet somebody who was a public figure from 50s or 60s who was a racist fuck. Can I say that?
You can.
You know, if they're a racist, and like John Wayne was pretty right wing. Yeah. I mean, I don't know, his politics were certainly not kosher. They weren't. He wasn't woke. He was not a woke man.
He was red baiting. He was part of the un-American, you know, the Hollywood movement to clear out Dalton Trumbull and all those guys. Great movie with Cranston, by the way, obviously.
Oh, I loved it.
Yeah,
I love that.
And all that shit's real. All that shit's real.
But I mean, that was what was happening in the United States. I mean, that was so if you're going to go and if you're going to go back and judge people based on the time that they lived in, I mean, that was the time they lived in. It's not our time today. So to try and use where we've evolved as people now and apply that evolution to somebody 50 or 60 or 70 years ago to pillory them, I don't think is – one, it's not productive, and two, it's also in a way disingenuous, because what's going to happen in 50 years from now? How are you going to be looked upon? You believe that you're woke or that your way of doing things is perfect, but you know what? We're in an evolutionary period of time all the time, and we're constantly moving forward, and I would like to think, as we become more comfortable with ourselves, our own humanity, and as we become – look, we're now more connected than ever before. We're going through – social media is in its infancy.
Yes.
And we have yet to understand how all of this is going to work on us as a species. Agreed. Not what color we are, but the human race. How are we as human beings, as Noah Yuval Harari would say – what do we want as a race? And we're not going to know. We're going to spend unfortunately, the rest of my time on this mortal coil is going to be spent in this ridiculously annoying evolutionary period where I'm watching college students demand free spaces from the very people they're paying to go to college to learn from, which is absurd. And we need to start asking ourselves, what is it that we as the human race wants? I mean, I really wish, they're talking about how the United States government, there's a lot of real UFO sightings now.
Yes.
They can't explain them. I wish like one day an alien race would show up and basically straighten us out.
Michael Renee.
And maybe,
we're all waiting for Michael Renee, man.
yeah. Or maybe a real great alien race just comes out and immediately exterminates, I don't know, 95% of the human race. Just boom, takes us out. And they're like, not even Thanos style, leaving half of us here. Then we will know real hardship. And you know what? Every single human being will be bonded by one thing, a desire to just run those alien terrorists off the earth and save what the remnants of mankind. Because you know what? You know what they say? There are no atheists in the midst of an alien attack. There are also no racists. There are no classists. There's no income inequality. There's nothing. When the alien ships are coming and the heat rays are flying above your head, we're all one species.
That's the best part. Go ahead. I'm sorry, man.
I welcome that day.
Yeah, that's the best part of Independence Day, I think, when at Area 51 they're kind of broadcasting how to fight the alien ship, and you see all across the world everyone receiving the information, and I forget what I'm sure they don't even identify what Middle Eastern country it is, and it's like, what do the Americans say? Okay, how do we do this? It's like, okay,
right. And what's great is if you remember, you see the whatever Arabic country it is, maybe it's the Egyptian Air Force and the Israeli Air Force right next to each other.
Yes,
and they're trying to coordinate, and that's I mean. Here, I've often said, like, I made a comment once recently. I said, you know what we've got to do? We've got to get everyone's mom together around the world. And we have to have, like, some convention or some festival where we get everybody's moms together and they cook their favorite dishes from all around the world. And we get all of these people, all of the different kinds of people in the world to sit down and eat mom's favorite dish. You know what somebody said to me? Well, that's just ridiculous. Do you think all moms should just be cooking? Do you think that they should all? And I'm like, okay.
You don't get it.
I go, you know what?
Never mind.
This is just my point was. The point is that everybody loves to eat.
Yeah.
Everybody's got a mom who's got a favorite dish. And there's nothing better than if you get all your moms together and share their favorite dishes from all over. The point is to take to sit down. And you know what? Make it your dad.
Exactly.
It could be your dad if you're in Italy,
your mother,
or your sister,
your brother,
or your cousin.
Yes.
But we just get whatever. But the problem is the fact that nobody can make that leap. Like if people understand and say, yes, Rob, we understand. It's all about the fact that when you sit down with people and break bread and have a meal together, you find common ground, Absolutely. Which is our love of food Absolutely. And international cuisine. What's more fun than celebrating the world by all sitting down and you have everybody bringing their favorite food dishes like a big potluck? But I was saying that the one thing that unifies us is everybody's got a mom.
Totally.
And of course then someone would say like, well, are you saying I grew up in a happy family? Because my family sucked. And I'm like, okay, you know what? We could go there. I get what you're saying and you're not wrong. But I was trying to make a uplifting example of how perhaps we can celebrate our differences by enjoying the fact that who's going to say no to moms serving up their favorite dishes? Well, apparently a lot of people, because it really wasn't woke to use that as an example. And suddenly I'm oppressing mothers that should just be barefoot in the kitchen. And I mean, it's like dudettes, whatever, non-binary people, aliens, people that feel whatever you are. The idea of sitting down for a good meal, somebody's got to cook it. In my personal example, I just happen to use moms. And, of course, people like jump down your throat. And then at the end of the day, it's like, you know what? Forget it. Why don't we eat? Well, let's not eat anything. And let's not honor our moms and pretend that our moms have our favorite dishes. We'll just walk away and we'll starve to death. How about that? Is that better?
Absolutely, man. No, I'm with you. Well, I very quickly about John Wayne, if you didn't know. Scott Iman's biography of John Wayne that came out about, Christ, now maybe it was like 2010. I forget what year it came out, but it's so good. And that was always my point about the Playboy thing in 73 was like, guess what? 1973 took care of John Wayne and shamed him for the terrible things he said in that Playboy interview.
Right.
Because, I hear you, man. Well, honestly, I love where the conversation's been going. I think it's been great, but there were a couple of nerd things I wanted to talk to you about.
Absolutely.
Well, God bless you.
Right now, I mean, people are probably going to come. See, now they're going to come after me after this. They'll be like, "Oh,
fuck them." All right.
Well, I mean, the funny thing is I'll tell you something that's happened. So I started this YouTube show on my YouTube channel, the Burnett Work, and I started Robservations. It was going to be this documentary show that I was going to go visit people and talk to people, which I still want to do.
Wayne, man, we're all waiting.
I know I've got that interview. I've got to drop. She's probably going, God damn it! I talked to that kid 6 months ago, and what? But it's gonna. I got to do that, and it's really good too, by the way. So start the channel. So I started doing this thing, and I started doing the Robservations, these daily chats, and I didn't really know what they were going to be. But what they sort of evolved into, I mean, I love my catchphrases. So I call the audience, as you know, everybody who listens is an imagination connoisseur. Yes. And which I like those things. When I was doing my DVD special edition features, I love coming up with funny titles or fun titles. Like imagination connoisseur is a catchphrase. And I came up with this term, the post-geek singularity. Because I read Ray Kurzweil's book about the coming singularity where artificial intelligence becomes sentient and self-aware. And when that happens, that's when the singularity occurs. By the way, for any of you listeners out there, one of my favorite movies about the singularity is Spike Jonze's movie Her.
Yes.
With Joaquin Phoenix and Scarlett Johansson is the voice of an app. Basically, it's an incredible movie. Great science fiction film. So one of the things I didn't realize when I started doing this is that I was preaching unknowingly this message of positivity, which didn't really – if you look at the nerd space or the imagination connoisseur space on YouTube, there's a lot of acrimony, whether it was the Sad and Rabid Puppies debacle, whether it's Comicsgate or Gamergate or Last Jedi Gate, or whatever. There's a lot of and I'm just like, I'm here going, man, but we live in great times. If you're an imagination connoisseur, there's great stuff out there. We're getting better stuff than we've ever got. You've got things like The Expanse, which is literary sci-fi. Denis Villeneuve is adapting Dune. We got Blade Runner 2049, which is amazing. We got The Handmaid's Tale. There's so much great stuff out there, and yet everybody's angry. Like all the time. And I'm like, when I was a kid, we would get like The Fantastic Journey on TV, and it would last 7 episodes and get canceled.
Yes.
I mean, that was it. That was sci-fi. The Logan's Run TV series would last 6 episodes and be gone.
How about Otherworld?
No more.
Otherworld?
Oh my God, Otherworld with Jonathan Banks. I loved Otherworld. You know what's really funny about that?
I went on that show. That's fantastic. Go on.
Jonathan Banks was the villain.
Yes, now that you said it, it clicked in.
I had an Otherworld jag about a month ago where I went on YouTube and they have all the episodes on YouTube. Of course they do.
That's fantastic. Oh, God.
It's great. And that's another great. We have YouTube where we can go watch Otherworld. Most people are like, what the hell's Otherworld? Well, it's kind of like The Fantastic Journey. One family travels through a bunch of different alternate realities. Exactly. And we have so much great stuff. The fact that I could get like a 1,600-page Fourth World omnibus collecting Jack Kirby's all of his Fourth World stories. That's 1,600 pages. It's the size of a I don't know. You could get in shape just lifting it.
It's a dictionary.
And that DC put it out. And then if you're not satisfied, you can get another omnibus with all of his Commandy stories. I mean, it's like we live in a world of riches. We live in a world, if you're a geek, we got the movies coming out. We got Star Wars Land open today in Disney. Yes. You can go get on the Millennium Falcon and walk around. They spent $1 billion. You can buy alcoholic drinks at a cantina in Star Wars Land now in Disneyland. And everyone's pissed off about everything. And I'm like, what is there to be? Sure, life sucks. There's a lot of horrible shit going on in the world. Terrible things happening. People are still racist, abusers. Horrible people. But on the other hand, there's Star Wars Land in Disneyland, or Galaxy's Edge. And I got models of the EVA pod from 2001, and there's people that make brass etched secondary parts, and I can get more paints. And I mean, you can get anything you want. There's a company, 1612, that's making more die-cast Eagle transporters from Space 1999 that are screen accurate. I mean, what's not to love? You can we're connected. We've got smart cars. We've got smart water. There's just awesomeness all around us. and everybody's mad and pissed off all the time
about the petty shit. Yeah.
And it was like, look, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of injustice in the world. There's a lot of people that feel marginalized. There's a lot of horrible shit going on. There's a lot of, let's face it, really dumb people doing really stupid things all the time. But that's been true since the dawn of man. I am sure that Cro-Magnon man was just as annoyed with their fellow man and fellow women as we are today. You know, you're standing in line at Whole Foods or at Trader Joe's and somebody has too much, they're talking too much to the guy checking them out. People get pissed off. I mean, it's like, come on, man. I mean, you really have to be somewhere in 5 minutes. A little friendly chit chat at Trader Joe's is not something to get pissed off about, but somebody will.
You're killing me, man. That's fantastic.
We have anti-vaxxers.
Yes,
like, you know what?
good Lord.
Vaccinations are examples of how science works. We have more measles outbreaks in the United States now than we've ever had since measles was cured.
Yeah.
Because people, this is insanity.
Yes.
This is insanity. I mean, you know what? Your cell phone works. Science has been pretty good to not just the United States, but to the human race. And you just decide, you know what? I'm not going to get a vaccination. My kids aren't either.
I'm hip.
Really?
No. Jenny McCarthy. What the hell, man? Smack her around. Oh my God, not smack her around. Shame on me.
But I don't mean to. So I realized that I was preaching this message of positivity that I wasn't even aware of. And now I've started reading letters on my show from people that send me these great letters. It just proved my point. If you set the tone and you try and elevate the discourse, and I try and talk about things that I love. You know, it's like that the Lyft driver I had who said, my artwork and my music is going to come from a place of where I think the world should be, where I want it to be. And I'm kind of like, guys, we're all imagination connoisseurs and we get crazy cool stuff happening all the time. Who would have thought that Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett's book, Good Omens, would get a miniseries on Amazon that stars Michael Sheen and Doctor Who?
Yeah.
I mean, come on. Yeah. It's Doctor Who's a demon and Michael Sheen's an angel. Who would have thought we live in a geek world of that happening? Totally. I mean, that book is great, and that's where we're at, man. There's cool stuff coming down the pike every day.
Patrol.
Oh my God!
It's so funny. I told you I won't reveal who I was talking. I told you off the air yesterday, and he brought up Doom Patrol, and I'm like, oh, I'm so glad you're watching that. He's like, who would have thought? He goes, that's a show that would never be on one of the big networks. It's like 100%. And it is so ridiculously accurate of every iteration of the Doom Patrol. And it's, you know, I'm sure you feel the same way.
Narrated by the bad guy.
Alan Tudyk doing a great job on that show. And what a cast. Good Lord. I mean, everybody is great on that show. The girl that plays, the woman that plays, Rita, Elastigirl, was the same actor who was Candy on 2.5 Men, playing a hot, ditzy young lady, and does a 180 and is ridiculous and is channeling Betty Davis style old Hollywood attitude in this role. And I'm like, this is a brilliant actor. And of course, Crazy Jane, good Lord, that woman's on her own plateau and is acting her ass off. I mean, it's such a great show. I'm blown away. And again, who would have expected we'd get something like that? You and I growing up with Challenge of the Superheroes and the superhero roast that we got and the Star Wars holiday celebration, all of that. And we loved it. I mean, again, now we're Dana Carvey. We loved it because that's all we had.
I mean, you know, I was sitting in watching Endgame on the Disney lot. I went to a press screening.
Go on.
And I was watching, and the movie begins, of course, with Clint Barton under house arrest, has no idea what's going on, and then his family is vaporized before his eyes, and I'm just like, oh my God. I was sitting here because I've often joked that our Lord and Savior Kevin Feige and how he's created these 22 movies. Like I remember I was sitting next to my friend Nikki Griffin when I saw the first Avengers. And she and I, we'd never worked directly, but she was working on the show Femme Fatales that I was directing episodes of. And we didn't know each other, but we became friends. And she's a big comic book nerd. So we'd have lunch together all the time, and we'd go to the comic book store. And we're sitting in the Avengers. We're sitting at the ArcLight Sherman Oaks. And I just kept looking at her, and she kept looking at me. And we're both like, I can't believe we're watching this. Like, I couldn't believe not only that they made an Avengers movie, but that before that we got Iron Man, Thor, and Captain America movies. If you would ask me in 2007 if that was going to be the case, I would have said, Psst, no way. Who's going to make this stuff? And now, not only can you watch Doom Patrol on the DC Universe streaming service, well, if you watch today, the Swamp Thing show just dropped.
Have you watched it yet? I haven't watched it yet.
No, I haven't watched it yet. But I mean, that produced by James Gunn, who, he made Aquaman that made $1 billion. I mean, we live in such a wacky, wonderful world that I just, I think about my friend Carrie David. I've known her. She was a producer. She and I produced Agent Cody Banks along with some other people. She became a documentary filmmaker, and she just debuted a movie. Like 5 years ago, if you would ask me if Carrie David would ever direct documentaries, I would have said probably not. She's a producer. She just directed her second documentary about women on the front lines of the poaching war. These women in Africa that are saving the great animals, the tigers, the lions, the elephants, the giraffes. And she traveled to all through Africa and to Vietnam to make this movie. Wow. And it's going to be at the San Francisco Film Festival, which it's the first was sold out. The movie's called Breaking Their Silence. Okay. She's making that, and it's incredible. It's just amazing.
Well, and that's why I'm glad you're doing what you're doing with your stuff. But go on, continue.
Well, no, and I'm watching my friend Zach Stentz, who wrote Agent Cody Banks that we were producers on, has a movie on Rim of the World. He wrote a movie called Rim of the World that dropped on Netflix that McGee directed. Yeah. And I just look around to the people I know and to everything that's happening. And there's so much opportunity now with the internet and everything that goes on. And we live in a time that I'm not saying that you don't have to work for it, because you do. And I'm not saying that you don't, but you do. But if you want to, there's more opportunity. I can sit at home and talk on my computer to the entire planet. And it's amazing.
I hear you, man. No, and again, I always say, people like yourself, I feel like we're kindred spirits because we're doing what we want to do, and our careers didn't. It's like Redford. What Redford says in The Natural. My life didn't turn out the way I expected, and that's okay because it's a sad moment in The Natural, but actually, it's like now, as you say, you can make your own opportunities. As I told you off the air, Word Balloon is the radio show I always wanted to host, and I'm doing it. And it's hilarious because a lot of my old bosses that didn't understand what I was doing now are starting to get the power of the podcast and appreciate it. And you're doing the same thing with your stuff, man. I mean, that's the great thing that you're pushing forward. And I know you always say it on your YouTube show that you've only directed one movie and you directed a handful of Femme Fatale episodes. But it's like, fine. Yeah. But again, you're like, you've got these other projects that you're doing. You keep pushing forward. And you're making your own shit. And thank God, in today's environment, there don't have to be gatekeepers to keep you from getting done what you need to do and what you want to pursue your passions. This is great. You're right. It is a great time.
Right. And it's funny. I mean, you literally – I didn't watch a lot of YouTube now, but what's really interesting is on one hand, I'm sort of sad that movies are not what I would call the relevant cultural force they used to be.
Okay.
I do think that movies, especially studio films, have become spectacle driven.
Yes, no question.
And on one hand, I sort of weep for the fact that I liked growing up watching studio movies like Network.
Well, like you said, the midline produced movies that weren't spectacle minded. Go on, excuse me.
But like movies of the 70s, you look at these studio movies, like whether it was Serpico or like The Godfather or Network or All the President's Men. The funny thing is no studio would make All the President's Men, but now we do get a movie like Spotlight,
yes,
which is about journalism uncovering the cover up by the Archdiocese in Boston. Yeah. We are getting those movies. It's just that they don't permeate the culture the way, say, All the President's Men did, because of course it was about Watergate. So we're getting those things made, but they're not a part of the cultural conversation the way, say, Endgame was. These Star Wars movies, studio movies have become spectacles, but between the shows that Netflix and Amazon and Hulu are dropping, and we still have some incredible content, HBO making Chernobyl, which feels like it was made in the 70s. There's still a lot of great content on. The difference is, and it's just that there's so much of it that it really becomes hard to see it all. And so, I remember as a kid when a James Bond movie was on the ABC's tonight.
Absolutely,
on the ABC
man.
Sunday night.
Yes, indeed.
Sean Connery is James Bond. Diamonds Are Forever. They never showed the one you wanted to see. Like, why can't they show Thunderball again? But they're going to show Diamonds Are Forever again. And you're like, okay, I'll watch Diamonds Are Forever. And you'd have to play this game where you'd beg your parents. You'd be like, I know it's going to be 3 hours, and I know it's going to go off at 11 o'clock, but I know my bedtime's 9. But can I stay up? And my parents would always say yes.
That's fantastic.
But it was still a negotiation. You still have to go to them and go, listen, Mom, it's a James Bond movie. But you go to school the next day, and every single kid, guy or girl, had watched that James Bond movie.
Absolutely, man.
Now it's like Endgame, these spectacle films are kind of the new version
and
of
Game
that.
Of Thrones,
and it's every week.
Game of Thrones became that. That's true.
Oh, yeah. And a lot of TV. Look, Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul. My girlfriend Elizabeth got me watching Ozark, which and thankfully she went back and watched the entire first season with me. And for us, it's really interesting. Like I haven't really had, like, Elizabeth and I. She never remembers what we watched, but she likes watching this stuff as much as I do, and we get into it. And it's nice to have somebody in your life that will sit down and watch these movies and really love them and really get something out of it. And like it's almost like this ongoing endless adventure that we're on. Like, what are we going to watch next?
Yes.
What series are we going to look at next? And it's like you're having these shared experiences, and they might not be movies that you could have these political discussions over, but you'd watch these shows that last 10 hours or 20 hours. Like I was binging Breaking Bad. Truth be told, last year I'd never seen Breaking Bad.
I still haven't seen it, but so I understand. Believe me, I do understand.
I bought it. I bought the series. It comes in a 50-gallon. You'll figure out when you watch. It comes in a miniature 50-gallon oil drum. The entire series, and I binged the whole thing. By the way, it's incredible.
I know all my writer friends that I respect are like, John, what are you waiting for? Please watch this show,
dude. You'll love it's so good. It's one of those things where you're watching this. It was like being in film school at USC. There was also a lot of movies that I saw. Like I had never seen Robert Altman's Nashville.
Great movie, yeah.
I was a country music fan. I was no reason to watch it. But when I was at USC, they would show it in Norris Theater, this 500-seat theater, and I would get to see these movies in the theater. And one of my favorite movies of all time, All About Eve. I'd never seen All About Eve. I knew it was Best Picture in 1950. I knew you can't have gay friends growing up and not hear about All About Eve.
Okay.
Because I did, and it's just, and I heard about it, I'm like, and there, I had these two guys, they were a couple, and they're always like, I was always the token straight dude. Like they would bring, we'd go to a Madonna concert and they'd bring me, the two of them, and then one other guy hoping I would turn. It was very funny. But I love them to death. And they would talk about All About Eve, and I'm like, oh, and they're like, are you going to watch it yet? And I'm like, well, I haven't watched it yet. So I saw that in film school, and I saw Drew Casper's Cinema 190 class at USC, and I was watching All About Eve, and from the very beginning, when that movie starts, George Sanders, who plays a character named Addison DeWitt. Come on, what a great name. He's delivering this VO, this voiceover, and it's this award ceremony. And it's black and white. It won Best Picture in 1950, so this shouldn't surprise me. But as I'm watching this, I was entranced. I mean, it had me from the from the get-go. I mean, clearly it's Joseph Mankiewicz. It's one of the greatest screenplays ever written. Yes. And I'm watching this movie and I'm like, this is clearly one of the best movies I have ever seen, and it might very well be my favorite screenplay of all time, even today. Yeah. And I'm watching this and I'm thinking, well, there's a reason. You watch these things and there's a reason that they endure. And John Campy and I are always having this argument about subjectivity versus objectivity in art.
Yes, I've heard you say
and
that.
I've always made yeah, and I think that there is objectivity. We can't. Is it measurable yet? Well, no. I think we will eventually figure out how that certain things I read a lot of Carl Jung in college and Man and His Symbols and all that stuff. I saw altered states. I know about the first truth.
Ken Russell.
So I do believe, that there's stuff like that in us. So I do believe that there is objective truth in art and storytelling. There's things that we just respond to. I mean, how would you quantify that? There's 100 million calculations you'd have to do. But I think that I think it's there. And when you're watching a movie like All About Eve, it's like this is a objectively, demonstrably great film because it's working. Movies work on three dimensions, a very three-dimensional level. Story, the verisimilitude of what you're actually watching. There's so much going on in a film. That's why they're so hard to make well. Sure. But I was always shook, surprised by these incredible feats of cinema that had passed me by. Yes. And now I can't even imagine trying to catch up because it's just grown exponentially since then.
True.
And we're in a world of riches and wonders, and and again, if you're predisposed to look, I understand that you have to have a certain level of education, you have to have a certain level of comfort in your life to even pay attention to content like movies. I get all that. And I thank my lucky stars that I don't have to like bathe in the Ganges River every day, and that I have a place to hang my hat, and we have electricity and food, and I have great blue
village over and everything. Yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, and nobody's going to hunt me down because of my Amazon purchase list. Oh, you bought this movie? Come with us, sir. I mean, you're reading Noah Yuval Harari's book *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus*. Come with us. We don't have to live through that. Although we don't have to live through that time yet.
Yeah,
we're heading straight into the Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah, damn straight.
Quickly.
Yeah. You're killing me, man. That's hilarious.
It's incredible. And, it's a funny thing. Why should I care about women's reproductive rights? How is it going to affect me in the rest of my life? I mean, I hear that so much, but instead of women's reproductive rights, add in climate change or add in, what do I care about income inequality? I'll be dead soon. It's so, man, the pyramids are still here. The pyramids are still here. The Parthenon is still here. The Mona Lisa is still hanging in the Louvre. No one splattered paint on it yet. Yeah. And this is protected. But it's like these things matter. And I like the fact that we live in a world where there's megaliths like Stonehenge that we don't even understand how they got there. How did they make statues on Easter Island? Well, you know what? Somebody made them 2,000 years ago because they thought it was important, and we're puzzling over them today. Wouldn't it be great if we continue to leave a legacy for the generations to come after us? Another columnist that I love is Dan Savage, who writes a sex column, and I've read it.
Absolutely, man.
Big fan of Dan Savage, and he has this rule. He calls it the campground rule. And if you're going to hook up with somebody, whether it's somebody older or younger than you, or just somebody the same age, maybe a relative, whatever, whoever you're going to hook up with, practice the campground rule, and that is leave the campground in a better state than how you found it.
Star Trek V, pack up your trash.
Pack up your trash. And I believe that. So why shouldn't we as humanity adopt a principle that why don't we make the world a little bit better place before we check out?
Yeah, I'm with you, man.
Leave a toilet paper roll for the person that's going to come out and into the bathroom next to you. Don't drink all the Jameson. Leave a couple of shots in the bottle, which is for me hard to do. Why not just make sure that the world is left into a little better place? Why not just smile at somebody and give them a tip of the hat or whatever? Why not? Why not leave? Don't we want to leave? What are the pyramids of our day going to be?
Exactly.
Certainly not MySpace.
Absolutely. I know. Good Lord, you're killing me. Am I keeping you too long? Okay,
no.
Good.
I can't. You let me babble on this time.
I
feel like Ralph Garman and Kevin Smith, Hollywood Babylon.
Well,
this is from Pasadena.
Coming from broadcasting, man. I mean, this is why I like Word Balloon. And certainly my 3-hour Bendis conversations are a testament to that. So I don't mind either, and if it's okay, because there are a few other nerd things that I did want to ask you very quickly.
Please bring it on. I mean, I was about to start talking about Bret Easton Ellis's first nonfiction book, White, that I'm in the middle of, but I will refrain.
Well, I know you and Campia went to CinemaCon, which used to be Show West.
We did.
And God, I'm so glad you were the first person I heard from about them adapting The Kitchen as a film.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I love that graphic novel. I hope you pick it up. Ollie Masters and Ming Doyle created it, and now, of course, this week the trailer dropped, which is fantastic.
It looks, yeah. The trailer is a little different than what they showed us at CinemaCon, but I thought the CinemaCon trailer was great, and this trailer that dropped is great too. And I guess there's a foreign version of it. It had like some subtitles on it but it looks fantastic.
Yeah, I agree with you, man.
It's another one of those movies that you talk about. Well, let me talk about my favorite comic adaptation this year, The Kitchen. People are like, what?
Exactly, man. Well, just like...
Yeah, it's like Ghost World and Road to Perdition and American Splendor, History of Violence. Yes. They're all adaptations.
Well, that's the great thing, man. No, and you're right about that. And it's funny because Road to Perdition was, I want to say right around when I started Word Balloon, because I talked to, or at least recent enough that when I talked to Max Allen Collins on one of my first podcasts, I had to ask him about all that, and wasn't it amazing? And that who was it? Sam Mendes that directed it.
That directed. Yeah.
Yes, thank God. And that was early when they discovered, hey, graphic novels actually are sophisticated, and there are great stories here. And again, The Kitchen is a prime example of that. In fact, Ollie Masters, who wrote it, just started a new series with Aftershock called Killer Groove that came out this past Wednesday. And it's an LA 70s crime story, much like Kitchen is a 70s New York story and everything. Well, yeah, I was curious because regarding CinemaCon, and I really appreciated yours and Campia's coverage of it and everything. We're in the summer season and everything, so yeah, what are you excited about as far as other movies?
Well, I'll tell you, I love horror films, and I really want to see Avi Asher's new movie. He made Hereditary. Okay. And his new movie from A24. A24 is a distribution company. I guess they're now financing movies, but anything that A24 puts out, I will watch. And they put out Hereditary. They put out The Witch. I don't know if they're going to put it out, but I think Robert Pattinson, the Willem Dafoe Robert Pattinson movie by the same director of The Witch, The Lighthouse, that debuted at Cannes. I really want to see that. But I really want to see Hereditary, the Midsummer, which looks like it's some weird cult movie that takes place in Scandinavia. As I always say, I love movies about satanic cults or pagan rituals. Give me like movies like Race with the Devil or The Wicker Man.
What was Travolta's 70s satanic cult movie?
Oh, The Devil's Reign.
Oh, okay, because I was thinking that maybe, and another one, Satan's Schools for Girls or whatever it was.
Oh, yeah, Satan's School. Yeah, Satan's
But I think you're right.
Girls.
Devil's Reign was probably the Travolta one. Do you remember the one with Stella Stevens and, oh, God, I can't remember the Hispanic gentleman's name, the actor. He was on The Flying Nun. And The Devil's Triangle, maybe.
Let's see. I don't remember that. I don't think
that was, and as you know,
that was a TV movie.
And as you know, there were some great TV movies that were made on a shoestring, but were really smart.
Oh my God.
And fun, scary movies.
Oh, I living in the 70s. As a matter of fact, I just bought a book, and I keep a guy I know, and I always forget his name. His wife wrote a book about TV movies of the 70s. And I'm going to look it up while I'm talking to you.
Because I would love to read that. That'd be great.
The book is awesome. I mean, it's more. Let's see. Memorable. Oh, right. See.
As you're looking it up, I'll want to let the listeners know. Leonard Goldsmith, who ran ABC in the 70s. I always talk about this, and I bet you already know about it. The Academy of Television has this great oral history archive of videos. And they talk to stars, they talk to technicians, cameramen, executives of networks, and it really is the history of television. And within Leonard Goldsmith's interview, he talks about the creation of ABC's Movie of the Week and what they set out to do, the budget they had, the resources they had. They made the deal with Universal. Universal, as Rob well knows, was this incredible factory of a back lot of the studio that transitioned to television very early on in the 50s and really, is the backbone of so many, shows that you watch now on certainly MeTV and things like that, from Quincy to Cannon and Barnaby Jones and all these other great shows. And they were also cranking out these 90-minute movies. And again, as Rob likely knows, you had Steven Spielberg making Duel. an incredible movie with Dennis Lever. And an incredible suspense movie, and of course the creation of The Night Stalker, the first two, and the $6 Million Man. All of these were movies of the week. So, and go on. I figured by then you might have a title by now.
Oh no, I found. So the name of this book is "Are You in the House Alone?" A TV movie compendium from 1964 to 1999, and it's by Amanda Reyes. and there are two books that I got reasonably around the same time. One was this book, and the other book is Grady Hendrix' book, Paperbacks from Hell, The Twisted History of 70s and 80s Horror Fiction. And both have some good commentary. They're not exactly as insightful necessarily as I want them to be, but they're a celebration. And going through these books will if you grew up in this era and you were a kid in the 70s, I mean, you can't not look at these books. Like, I would buy the most lurid horror paperbacks from the 70s to the 80s, books that I was totally, wholly inappropriate to read. You know, like I remember reading James Herbert's The Fog, that has nothing to do with Carpenter's movie. The awesome sex and violence in that book. I'm reading it like I'm 11. When I was like 11, it was very funny because my Aunt Barbara, my dad's sister, would always buy me books. So I would always tell her to buy me books like, and she bought me 5 James Herbert books. She bought me like The Survivor, The Dark, the Fog. I wanted The Rats, and I think it was Lair, the second book of the Rats trilogy. And I remember she gave it to me for my birthday or something, and she goes, Bobby, the girl at the counter asked me how old you were, and I didn't tell her. You're going to be 11, and or 12. I was probably 12, and I'm like, no, it's okay. They're just monster books, Aunt Barbara. And of course, unbelievable murder and hardcore sex, and I'm just like reading all this stuff. But so Grady Hendrix' book, Paperbacks from Hell, is a celebration. It's got a lot of the more famous covers.
Okay. Oh God! And
then, of course, Are You in the House Alone? Amanda Reyes' book it goes through all of these TV movies, and it gives a little synopsis and talks about them. And they're tremendous resource books. But I will say, what Grady Hendrix has done. Probably he wasn't thinking about this, but what he did was, like, I used to love to go to the Odyssey bookstore, the used bookstore, or the Iliad, pardon me, the Odyssey, it was Odyssey Video, the Iliad bookstore here in LA, because they had this incredible horror paperback section. But since the publication of Grady Hendrix' book, Paperbacks from Hell, all of these lurid paperbacks that I used to love that you could get at a whim, you could find anyone that you wanted, they're all gone. They've all been bought up by people, and they're being sold on the secondary market, like on Amazon. This book's $300.
Oh yeah,
and it there was a great joy going in, and now it's like you go into these bookstores, and the only horror fiction you can find are Stephen King and Dean Koontz, whatever. It's like I've seen these books a million times everywhere I go. The lurid, because nobody read. It was so funny until. What's really interesting now is seeing how when you and I know you're a little older than me, but everything that we grew up with, it's like the new Fangoria magazine is doing retrospectives of movies that the original Fangoria covered when they first came out.
You're right. I know, man. We're old.
And it's like we already lived through all of this. And it's like I always go to people, I go, who do you think was on the cover of Fangoria #1? And everyone's like, I don't know, Freddie. I'm like, no, Freddie came out in 1984. Well, Jason or Leatherface. No. No. I always go, Godzilla was on the cover of Fangoria #1. People are like, no, he wasn't. I'm like, oh, really? Who was on the cover of Fangoria 4? R2-D2 and C-3PO. And people are like, nah. And then Mr. Spock was on the cover of Fangoria, I think 6. Because they hadn't figured out what Fangoria really was yet.
Sure.
And it's funny to, like, now there's all of this nostalgia. You see the younger fans have nostalgia, like Grady Hendrix' book comes out, and all these, it becomes a hipster thing to buy horror paperbacks of the 70s and 80s, which I think is funny, and it pisses me off, although it also makes me happy about the fact that I still have many of my horror paperbacks from the 70s and 80s in quite good condition. I'm like, yes, I have Dennis Etchison passed away this week, and he was a great horror novelist, but he wrote under the title Jack Martin, and he wrote the novelizations for like Halloween 3 and Videodrome, both of which I have under a pseudonym Jack Martin, and they're like worth $100 now. So, but it's just funny to see this nostalgia, and when Amanda Rhea's book, because it was her husband that told me about it actually at Comic-Con last year. And we were sitting and he's telling me about this book that his wife wrote. And I go, your wife wrote a book on TV movies in the 70s? He's like, yeah, she's really into it. I'm like, oh my God. And talk about the world we live in. I pull out my phone. I go to Amazon. Sure enough, there it is. Are you in the house alone? Click, and it shows up at my house 2 days later. I mean, come on.
Awesome, man.
I'm reading a book.
Real fast on that book. Is it just horror movies of the 70s, or is it all genres that they did for the movie of the week?
No, it's all
I'm
genres.
excited. I'm even more excited. Go on.
Yeah, it's all genres. And what's really cool now is like my beloved Warner Archive, they're putting out Blu-rays of like Bad Ronald. They haven't put out a Blu-ray of Don't, or maybe they did put out Don't Be Afraid of the Dark, but now you're being able to get these movies like Stranger Within, when Barbara Eden was impregnated by an alien light and she's going to give birth to an alien baby, and she starts painting pictures of the surface of this alien planet. I mean, I love this stuff. Killdozer, and that was like based on a Ted Sturgeon story or something. I mean,
I didn't realize
like
that.
You said,
that's amazing. Go on.
Or something like that. I remember seeing a movie called Sweet Hostage that starred Martin Sheen, and he takes Linda Blair hostage.
She eats the apple. Very sexy. When you're 14 years old, that was very sexy. Absolutely, man.
I mean, and these movies were like R-rated movies in the theater today.
And they were movies of the week. You're right. Sybil. Joanne Woodward and Sally Field, an amazing TV movie.
Incredible.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. God, and of course the British. Good luck. And I'm so glad. Again, you brought up talking to Patrick Stewart on your YouTube show, and what absolutely made Patrick Stewart love you was bringing up I, Claudius, and I'm like, oh, dude, I Claudius. Good Lord, man, what an incredible achievement of British television. It's truly one of my all-time favorite miniseries as well.
Oh yeah. I mean, again, another, people don't know that.
Well, sure.
You talk to people, like I've talked about I, Claudius so much that I love I, Claudius so much. And I've tried to get people, I'm like, what The Godfather is to movies, I, Claudius is to television, to PBS.
Sure. For real,
and to the BBC, and I try and get people to watch it, and because it was shot on videotape, it looks like a soap opera. But the actors are incredible, and it's hard to get people to sit down and take it seriously. They don't. You literally have to train yourself to look with different eyes.
Well,
it's like when Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio tells Ed Harris in The Abyss, you have to look with better eyes than that.
You're right. And again, this is the problem with some young people regarding black and white movies. And they're like, I just can't get into it. And it's like, oh, you're really missing, 100 years of incredible filmmaking. But okay, whatever.
I know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny. Somebody asked me today for my top 10 Godzilla movies. On Twitter. I was like, man, I'm happy you asked. So, and what's funny is my favorite Japanese kaiju movie is Rodan, the original Rodan, which was, I believe, the first color kaiju movie. And it was a movie that it actually scared me when I was a kid, because it's scary. Rodan is scary because the beginning is like a horror movie. You don't know what's going on. And there's these larvas, and you don't know what's happening. And as a kid, it was like, I loved Rodan, and I've loved, even to this day, I've said that the Godzilla King of the Monsters that's opening today, the day we're doing this podcast, it on the Rotten Tomatoes, it has less than 50% critical acclaim, but its audience score, verified audience score, which means verified people that have actually seen the film, bought a ticket and watched the movie, the verified audience score is at 90%.
That's excellent.
And I said to people, I go, I love this movie, and I've got people that are watching it, like John Campy didn't like it, and people in the pundit space. I'm like, look, man, you have to be predisposed to liking a movie like Godzilla King of the Monsters. If you're expecting some realistic portrayal of something, it's not going to be for you.
Yes.
And I've often talked about that Asian science fiction has a certain whimsy that doesn't translate well to us, to the Western world. And the idea of these giant monsters is one of those things. Adults, I think, are hard pressed to watch a movie about Godzilla and get anything out of it. But
I
crazy.
agree, and Well, two things. I had a buddy in radio who would get the Japanese imports of the Toho movies through the 90s. And it was fantastic, and I'd watch them with him. And also, I always loved Tarantino's theory that the Toho movies are from an alternate universe. Gilbert or Tallulah.
Yes, that was Gilbert coming by.
That's excellent. Two of Rob's dogs, Gilbert and Tallulah. Unbelievable. And adorable dogs, man. They're very beautiful dogs.
They're hilarious.
But I love Tarantino's theory about the Toho films in that it's an alternate universe where Japan won the Second World War, and they are the dominant superpower. And that's why they're the ones that are always facing these giant monsters. And I think he said it probably at like an Alamo kind of, film festival or something. And I'm like, that is brilliant. And I love that point of view. And and growing up as you and I did, watching those movies on Saturday afternoons on the UHF channels and everything. No, man, you're right. You really need to have a kind of unique head to appreciate those and where they're coming from. And again, of course they don't translate well. And like you said, I mean, good Lord, that 1999 Godzilla was unfortunate. I still haven't seen the Bryan Cranston first, 2014 movie. I liked Pacific Rim enough, but you talking as highly as you do of King of the Monsters, I'm kind of like, I probably will end up seeing this one. So,
well, yeah, I mean, King of the Monsters. The thing about Godzilla 2014, and it's a very admirable movie, but it's trying to be so earnest. It's trying to make everything really earnest and make it seem as realistic as possible. And the reason. Like, I like what he did, the way that he tried to shoot Godzilla as if Godzilla were real, and you're always shooting it from the man on the street's perspective and things like that. But I'd say if you want to see that, go see Godzilla GMK All Out Monsters Attack. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you want to see, or even like Shin Godzilla, which is the last Toho Godzilla movie where it's basically FEMA dealing with a Godzilla attack, and it's really interesting. So you're dealing with government bureaucracy and all that. But like one of my favorites, I mean, Toho I think is the best. I mean, Toho, Rodan I think is the best monster movie. But one of my favorite Godzilla movies as a pulp sci-fi fan is Godzilla versus Monster Zero, or Godzilla versus the Astro Monster, because the plot of this movie is we discover an alien planet. And Planet X, and there's these technologically advanced aliens, and we send a group up there led by Nick Adams, and the aliens are like, look, man, we got a problem with our Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, and he's laying waste to our planet. Can we borrow Godzilla and Rodan to take care of our Ghidorah problem? And Earth's like, oh, sure, why don't you come down? So these aliens, when they're flying saucers, they, of course, take Godzilla and Rodan, but really secretly they're going to reprogram them, and all three monsters are going to be unleashed on the Earth, and these aliens bid to take over the planet. And, I mean, when I was a kid, this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. Absolutely. Like, I mean, not only that, like these hot Japanese alien girls in this silver and black outfit, and then the controller with the badass thin black sunglasses. I mean, you can't go wrong here. This stuff was the greatest thing. And there was such this Forbidden Planet feel when they had this painted backdrop on Planet X when Ghidorah is flying across the landscape with his three heads blasting nuclear fire. I mean, when I was watching this as a kid, I took this stuff seriously. Sure. I'm like, all right, then, this is a problem, and the Earth shouldn't have done this. And why I think to myself, why was Earth so stupid? You just realized that aliens exist, and you gave them Godzilla and Rodan because they asked you to? Like, how dumb can you be? But as a kid, there was nothing more fun than watching these movies. And look, I'm not saying you have to grow up watching these movies, but there is a certain level of you have to be able to put aside. It really takes, like I told people, I tweeted when I first saw Godzilla King of the Monsters, somebody asked me what it was like. I said it was as if my 8-year-old inner child snorted a Tony Montana mountain of cocaine. That's what I said seeing Godzilla King of the Monsters was like. And because it tapped into that primal kid thing that I've never been able to get rid of. And that's why I love – look, people are like, well, Pacific Rim was just a low-rent Top Gun narrative stuck on a monster movie. I'm like, yeah, and it was fucking awesome. I mean, my only criticism of Pacific Rim was that there's these great Chinese triplets, and they get dispatched pretty quickly in their Jaeger. When I wanted to see them really take down a kaiju in the movie, but the kaijus in the movie they didn't fight as long as I wanted. But other than that movie's flawless. What are you talking about?
Pacific Rim a lot. I do.
Pacific Rim 2, not so much.
I agree
but
with that as well. Yeah, man. No. Too funny. You're killing me, man. Very quickly, Star Trek stuff, and then we'll wrap up. And it got 5 hours later. No, you know something, man. I'm with you on Discovery. Obviously, I mean, we were complaining about it in the first season, for Christ's sake. And yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see if we do get a third season. I don't believe we necessarily will. We'll see what happens, especially with all the behind the scenes stuff of Netflix not being involved in the Picard series, that it goes to Amazon Prime. That's very interesting. But look.
Yeah, there's wacky stuff happening.
Yeah, and I mean, and again, I'm in Chicago, so I'm completely insulated. And I only know what I learned on the internet. That's always your first mistake. But I love Midnight's Edge's coverage of it. I agree with you that I don't agree with everything they think, and I think there are some other subjects that they cover that I'm like, okay. But I mean, the Star Trek stuff, like that whole 75 or 25% different thing. It just seems like we're getting hit over the head with it. And you make the direct point of JJ wanted to get involved with this for the merch, to sell toys. Because, go ahead, yeah.
Well, I butted up. So for your listeners who might not know, I have had an extensive career producing DVD and Blu-ray special features, documentary special features. And I worked on the Star Trek The Next Generation restoration that came out on Blu-ray. I created, along with Roger Lay Jr., all of the extensive documentary special features. And one of the things we did was on season 2, I was the on-camera host for a roundtable discussion with all the principal cast of Next Generation. One of the highlights of my life, actually.
You did a great job.
And it was a lot of fun. And then at the end, the J.J. Abrams movie had come out, and Into Darkness was coming out and hadn't opened yet. So the question arose with the cast: what will it be like when the Next Generation cast is rebooted, the same way that J.J. Abrams brought us back new versions of Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Uhura, Chekhov, Sulu, the Enterprise crew, and they started riffing on that. And at first, Patrick Stewart said, "Well, I already know because in X-Men First Class, James McAvoy plays a young Charles Xavier." And then they were riffing on that, and it was really delightful, and it was really charming. And this is something that was in the real world. We weren't showing any clips. It was just them talking. So I finished this off. I also edited the piece, and I delivered it to Paramount, and their lawyers had to watch it.
Basically.
The only note back I got was that I had to cut out any reference at all to J.J. Abrams' Star Trek. And I was like, what?
Yeah,
what?
That makes no sense.
And what was interesting was our documentaries were the only new Star Trek content that CBS had produced for release in a long time. I mean, Paramount was making the movies under their separate licensing deal. But CBS, our documentaries, we had 2 dedicated lawyers that just looked at all of our stuff. And I had to cut it out. And it was then that I understood that there is a licensing agreement that is different for Bad Robot and CBS. Whatever Bad Robot and Paramount have, there could be no crossover at all with whatever deal was going on. And of course, they're not going to get into specifics, but I had to make that alteration. And we couldn't mention it at all, which was really interesting because with Into Darkness coming down the pike and the state of Star Trek and all that, it was very interesting to me, and I thought it was very strange that Star Trek to me is a continuum. You can't not talk about, but it was apparent to me, and I know from my own experiences in the entertainment business, when you make deals, Star Trek as a franchise, when Bad Robot took over, it was sort of moribund. It had gone off the air in 2005 with Enterprise. And J.J. Abrams, I'm sure the licensing deal that they made with Paramount, Star Trek existed concurrently in the Berman era as theatrical feature films and as a television show. Sometimes there were 2 television shows on the air and movies. Like there was a Next Generation movie while Deep Space Nine and Voyager were on the air.
So if you're going to make the Khitomer Accord that they discuss in Star Trek 6, Spock makes reference to in Unification. So you did have that through
Right.
line and everything. Kind of like Marvel Television and the Marvel Cinematic Universe before that barrier was built.
Yes, and there's absolutely, and what's interesting is the movies, the Star Trek, what I would consider the canonical Star Trek, is from 1966 to 2005. Totally. And then again, this is all, and I'm listening. I don't know if Midnight's Edge has it right. I don't know if Gary Beekler on Nerdrotic, they talk a lot. I really like, for the most part, I tend to shy away from a lot of their social justice, raving, but their reporting, and I certainly respect Midnight's Edge, the videos they put out, because there's a lot of production work that goes into their videos.
Yes.
Very entertaining. And, look, it's so funny to me that everybody's speculating on the internet about Star Wars or Star Trek, and the only people that get pilloried for doing so are Midnight's Edge and Nerdrotic and things like that. Like, are you kidding me? I mean, they're actually trying to do more scholarship than anybody else, and yet they're the ones. Midnight's Edge gets called out for being speculative. It's so silly to me. That's like, what does Martin Sheen say in Apocalypse Now? That's handing out or blaming somebody for murder in Apocalypse Now. He says is like handing out speeding tickets at the Indy 500 or something like that. I mean, wow, you're going to take. And I like the Midnight's Edge people, and I like talking to them, and why not? You can have pundits. It's like on all sides, but I think clearly when Bad Robot took over the Star Trek franchise, because they make television. Yes. I mean, that's what Bad Robot was doing. I mean, they're just coming off of Lost. Television. They had Person of Interest.
Alias.
Felicity, Alias. They've done a lot of great TV. So when J.J. Abrams is going to take over the Star Trek franchise, he's like thinking to himself, well, I would also like the ability to make Star Trek television, because here's an empire that we could move into, a known IP, and let's take over. So clearly, to me, what happened when J.J. Abrams took over and Bad Robot took over in 2007, they carved out whatever deal they carved out. And now Alex Kurtzman, who wrote Star Trek 09 and wrote Into Darkness, is now the shepherd of the new Star Trek franchise. And clearly, whatever they're doing, they are working in a new Star Trek continuum. So they can use Star Trek product, but they have to change it enough that it is part of whatever their new continuum is. So you've got canonical Star Trek that I grew up with and I love, and then, well, their version of Star Trek, which is, I think, they don't quite know what it is, because in their minds their mandate was to turn it into a populist franchise that is accepted by all kinds of people. And Star Trek was always a niche franchise, and they're trying to turn it into a big franchise, whether it's Star Wars or whether it's Transformers or something that's going to make that kind of money, which in my mind is kind of stupid, because it'll never be that kind of franchise. But their mandate, they're going to do everything they can to try and make it socially relevant, but at the same time have mass appeal, which to me torpedoes the underlying idea of what Star Trek is, because basically Star Trek to me, and one of the reasons I love it, is it's an elitist franchise. And what I mean by that is it's about really smart people, the best at their jobs, doing really smart things. And it's about it is about, well, Ivy Leaguers.
Right.
It's about the best of the best going into space and being the best that there is. The new Star Trek is about people that are not the best. They're goofy and damaged and strange and on the spectrum and all this. And it's like, none of these people belong on Star Trek. That's not what Star Trek is about. Star Trek is aspirational, and it's about what we could be, not who we are.
Stemming from that,
the stories
from that Camelot, NASA, best and brightest, right stuff kind of era and everything. But go on. Yes.
Yep. And now it's not woke to be that way. Now we have to be all inclusive. I'm like, you know what being all inclusive in space will get you? Dead. It'll get you dead.
Well, if I may, a quick sidebar, because it infuriated me, and I've been meaning to talk to you about it ever since I saw the scene. There was one totally throwaway scene in Discovery in second season where it's a corridor on the Enterprise, or on Discovery probably, and in the distance you see a crew member in a wheelchair wheel by, and I was just like, okay, you've introduced this Ariel character that has basically 80% of her body is now cybernetic. Why wouldn't a physically challenged person in our federation and in the new society where there is no poverty and everyone gets what they need, why wouldn't that person have cybernetic legs? And it was, to me, this moment of, hey, don't worry, physically challenged people, you're there too. And I'm like, yeah, Geordi was blind, but he had a prosthetic so he could see. And again, you've set up cybernetic arms and legs. So that was, I don't know if you noticed that in watching.
Oh, yeah. Oh, no. And here's the thing. I'm sorry, people. I get we're in the 23rd century. We would be transhumans by then.
She is. The robot girl is. Ariel, I believe, is her name.
Oh, yeah. I mean, yeah. And all that. So you're going to have these things. By the way, she was done dirty. You know, the cyborg character that was a bridge crew member that later became revealed as being controlled by Control.
Right. Well, and got a longer funeral, by the way, than Mr. Spock did in Star Trek 2.
Yeah. I mean, and that's what I really don't like is like, I hate the writing on Star Trek Discovery. I think it's some of the worst science fiction and certainly some of the worst science fiction television writing we've ever seen anywhere.
It's Jason of Stark Command, Saturday Morning Bad, and I like Jason of Stark Command, but
Me too. No, it's and by the way, I don't think anyone has ever talked about this, but David Mack, one of my favorite Star Trek novelists, who's a huge fan of David Mack, he wrote a book, a Star Trek novel called Control, that is a Section 31 novel. I kid you not, called Control, about artificial intelligence. The entire second season of Discovery leads up to basically a ripoff of his book, and he gets no credit. And by the way, he has a great new series, an original series of novels called the Dark Arts series. And the latest book is called The Iron Codex. And it's great.
That's cool.
And if you want, yeah, it's sort of an alternate history of it's the Dark Arts 2 is the Iron Codex. And it's really really good.
Earth history,
and
okay.
Yeah, and the first one, the Midnight Front, starts in World War II.
Okay.
And the Iron Codex is in the 50s.
Okay. Oh, cool.
And it's great.
Cool.
And look, yeah, and he wrote his Destiny trilogy, which is an amazing Star Trek. But the fact that he was ripped off this way. My problem with modern Star Trek, with these guys, they have no showrunner.
Well, they've got like three showrunners
they've got. Yeah, and there's no vision at the top. There's everybody wants to get money and get their name on the show. Look at how many producers are on Discovery. It's a name. Yes. So there is no visionary producer. Say what you want about Rick Berman, but he ran a tight ship, so to speak.
On a budget. On a television budget.
On a budget.
Yeah.
They came in on time and on budget. Star Trek Discovery is one of the most, if not the most, expensive episodic television shows ever made.
29 hours.
Ever made. They're talking about the fact that I've heard upwards of, because of all the mismanagement, the people don't know what they're doing, and the fact that they've built these incredibly elaborate sets that, let's make a giant captain's ready room. Let's make it huge. So we have to light it and we have to wipe the floor all the time. It's like, what you guys are not making movies. You're making episodic television, and they've been spending an enormous amount of money. Now, here's the thing. They're now going to do a Picard show.
Indeed. I wanted to talk about it.
But their Picard show is not going to be canonical to the next generation. Now, again, I don't have any exact knowledge of this, but they're talking about the Picard show is going to deal with their canonical Star Trek comic book that led into Star Trek 09 about the destruction of Romulus.
Countdown.
They even said in the trailer that Picard led the greatest rescue armada, of our time.
Orsi and Kurtzman wrote that, correct?
Yeah, Orsi and Kurtzman wrote it. So it's the Picard of their universe. It's the Picard of their Star Trek. Whether it's 25% or not, it's not canonical Picard. It's their version of Picard. And yes, he shares DNA, and it's almost like it's the quantum realm. Historical version of Picard. He's not our Picard. He's not next generation Picard. You go through the quantum verse and you have a different reality, which is what their Star Trek is.
Like Prime Spock.
And that's why we're getting
Prime Spock from the 2009 film.
Right, and and Spock is not really Spock. Sure, it's Leonard Nimoy, but it's Spock coming from a different, and they don't have to say that. They don't have to come right out and say that. But I think in the Picard show, they're going to have to deal with the fact that his past is not the same as our past.
Why? Well, that's interesting because, and dude, I hear you, and I share your frustration with Discovery, and I'm just slightly more optimistic than your reactions to the teasers we've gotten so far. Just because it's likely going to be a different toned show, and you are dealing more with Picard himself. I hope for the same kind of reboot we got with Ron Moore and Battlestar Galactica, taking the general themes of the original and making something obviously much more complex and better. I just want something better than we got with Discovery, and if it is from that DNA of a general idea of Picard, I think maybe it will be like you can say this is, again, I'm just an optimist that maybe, if a diehard fan wants to believe this is the same Picard we got on Next Generation, that it will be loose enough that you can feel that way. It'll be interesting to see what we think. But I hear what you're saying.
You know what?
Go ahead.
I hope Spring's eternal, and I would love to see that be the case. Unfortunately, having Michael Chabon, is it Chabon or Michael Chabon?
As I understand it, it's Chabon.
Michael Chabon. It's Chabon or Chabon?
Michael Chabon.
Okay, Michael Chabon. Love his books. I'm a big fan of his. I loved his book on being a man, on fatherhood and stuff. I hope it's good. Yeah. I want it to be great. And the story of what does a man do when he's already done everything? Right. He comes back, and I love this idea.
What was that astronaut book you talked about? Where isn't there a guy who has been on the moon and is dealing with his
son and his life? Yeah, it's by Dan Simmons, one of my favorite writers, and it's called Phases of Gravity.
Okay. You see, this is part of Word Balloon, giving everybody the watch list and the reading list. So go Phases of Gravity.
Yeah, Phases of Dan Simmons wrote Hyperion. Oh, yeah. He wrote The Terror that they adapted the miniseries from. One of my favorite writers. Okay. He wrote Carrion Comfort, he also wrote Song of Kali. The man is an incredibly gifted writer, but
I'm hoping for that kind of story from Picard. Yeah, man.
Yeah, so he wrote this book called Phases of Gravity that's about an astronaut who comes back from the moon, and the fact that going to the moon is the greatest thing he'll ever do in his life. How do you reconcile that with having to lead the rest of your life and dealing with your son and dealing with family and dealing with the world around you? And the book, it was a great, great, great book. It's funny, I read that book and a book he wrote called The Hollow Man that both really, really, really affected me. I should go back and read those again. But and I just don't have any faith that they can write great science fiction or a great Picard story because, to my mind, Star Trek Discovery was god awful. Yeah. And it really was. And for all the technology and all the special effects and all the ridiculousness, it truly was god awful science fiction. Stupid. And for anybody that has a literary background at all, watching that show is insulting. Insulting in the extreme. And it's like, pick up a damn book, man.
Well, and go back to the original show of the 60s that had so many great sci-fi writers of the time. Ellison, and didn't Sturgeon write a Star Trek episode?
Yeah.
Well, there you go, man. I mean, and then it's funny, I was just talking about Twilight Zone with that guest I told you about. And we talked about how obviously Serling had that murderer's row of amazing literary science fiction writers writing Twilight Zone episodes. And yeah, man, Discovery, not so much.
Right? No. And
is it true, like you said, and I was going to let you say it, that a lot of them do come from like soap opera kind of backgrounds and stuff?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. And one of the guys that's big on the Picard show that I've heard has been a problem in the writers' room is one of the guys that created The Closer, the Kira Sedgwick show. I'm like, what's he doing in there?
Well,
I mean, what happens? What happens in the
say what's Roddenberry doing, writing Have Gun Will Travel, and suddenly we're out in space? And I know Wagon Train to the Stars, I get that, but I mean, I guess on face value,
I would say that
those
guys,
Straczynski doing Murder She Wrote before Babylon 5.
But those guys were real writers. They wrote books, they wrote short stories, and remember, Straczynski also took over the 80s revival of the Twilight Zone to round out the syndication package.
Yes.
And these are people that read.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And I think what's amazing about Star Trek is, first and foremost, science fiction is a literary genre.
100%, man.
If you are making science fiction that is only based on other science fiction media that you've watched, you're never going to win.
Yeah.
You're never going to be able to make great sci-fi. You have to have some kind of a working knowledge of the canonical sci-fi greats, even up to the present day. Because like one of my favorite books, and it's not an easy book to read, it's by a guy named Peter Watts, and it was nominated for the Hugo Award in 2006. It's called Blind Sight.
Okay.
And it is a very dense first contact story that takes place in, I think, like 2085. A lot of it deals with transhumanism, really interesting world building.
Cool.
And it's a rough read, but a dense read. But I love that book. And I'm like, there was more interesting ideas in that book. We have so much good. Star Trek should be reflecting where we're at. It should be extrapolating where our society is today. I mean, look, the Star Trek future is always going to be a future that we envisioned 50 years ago. But now, if you're making Star Trek, why are you not reflecting on where our culture is today? Why aren't people living 200 years? Why aren't we altering our bodies? Why aren't we one of the things about the Borg is I would have always done a counterpoint that humanity, at the same time, we can swap out our lungs. Picard has a artificial heart.
Right.
We are the Borg. We just keep our humanity. And the fact that we don't deal with any of those kinds of things, and the fact that we're not dealing with these heady sci-fi concepts. I mean, it was so insulting watching this story of Control, this AI run amok. I'm like, is this 1970?
It's
like
Colossus.
You're telling me,
it's the Foreman Project.
It's the Foreman Project. It's so terrible. It's the most rudimentary, basic, entry-level sci-fi thing. I mean, Star Trek never really had villains. It had antagonists,
Yes.
which were different.
Yes.
And even when we met the Klingons in first season's Errand of Mercy, when you meet Kor,
Yes.
John Colicos is playing Kor, the first Klingon.
Yep.
And he's going mano-a-mano with Barona, which was Kirk in disguise.
Yes.
They both recognize that each other are admirable. They're on opposing sides, but they're not. Even though he could have been a mustache twirling villain because he had quite the mustache,
Yes,
but he was a well-rounded, charismatic, interesting leader. And when you're watching him spar with Kirk as Barona, you're like, wow. And then at the end. When both sides, both Kirk and Kor, are pissed off that the Organians have stopped this battle, and Kor just says, "Yes, but it would have been glorious," and he smiles.
Yes.
And you look at that, or you look at Balance of Terror at the end when you realize that the Romulan commander and Kirk have a great mutual respect and admiration for each other, and the Romulan commander is sort of resolved to his fate, and he says, "Look, my duty was to test your defenses. When I found out they were weak, I had to go home and bring the message saying we can march into Federation territory. That's my job."
Yep.
And that's my duty. When he says, he says my
place I could have called you.
No, not that. When he says my when he's talking to a centurion and says, isn't that your duty?
Oh, yes,
another great.
When the subordinate challenges him.
When the subordinate, he goes, great. My duty, bringing home to the homeland another war.
Yes.
And he's like, but isn't that your duty? And Mark Leonard's like, must it always be so?
Yeah.
And these are nuanced, interesting conversations that allegorically apply to our time today, but also apply to people.
Yeah.
In their daily lives.
Yes.
And then at the point, what you were referring to at the end was when the Romulan commander resolves himself to his fate and is talking to Kirk and says, in another reality, you and I could have called each other friend.
Yep.
And he dies. He actually blows up I believe he blows up his own ship so he can't be taken alive or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
and that's his duty. That's his duty to perform. And this was heady stuff.
Agreed.
I mean, it was heady when I was 5. It's heady when I'm 50. I mean, And I'm watching Star Trek Discovery, and I'm like, what is this gobbledygook?
Well, the way they shit on the Klingons, good Lord. And I mean, really, thank God for people like Ron Moore and other great writers that really built on that core nuance. And also Kang in Day of the Dove, and how great he was, and to go after that alien and go, hey, we don't need you to influence how we're going to think or whatever.
We don't need provocation to hate humans, or whatever he says.
But there was always nobility to the Klingons.
How funny, they introduced Michael Ansar in Day of the Dove. He's married. He's a married dude.
Right, that's right.
We see Chekhov going crazy and gonna sexually harass his wife.
Yes.
Our character, the good guy, is sexually harassing Kang's wife Mara or whatever, and it's like
Mara,
you. This was some badass stuff. This was heady. Like Chekhov's a dick.
Yes.
And
of course by the alien, of course. Yeah.
Yeah. He had his brother Pyotr. Chekhov has no brother. All that stuff. All this stuff was great. And you look at this. These were written by people who and by the way, you had people like Margaret Arman. You had Dorothy Fontana who were writing for Star Trek. There were female writers. Dorothy Fontana became incredibly important to the direction and the development of Star Trek. And so even on the writing staff in the 60s, to have a woman like Dorothy Fontana play such a large role in shaping the show. So it wasn't just diversity. Sure, was it a boys' club? Of course it was. That's what the 60s were. Yeah. We were still in a transition period, and we're still in a transition period even now.
Sure.
It's just that, us white dudes we're the villains. We're the mustache twirling. We're the Klingons that need to be
watch an episode of Discovery and then, Leland and God, that one scene when, and obviously it was Control, but when the Vulcan Admiral is talking to Michelle Yeoh and Leland, and it's like, so what do you think we should do? And Leland starts to answer, he goes, yeah, I was talking to Michelle Yeoh. I was talking to George Yeoh. And it's like, oh, fuck you. Come on, man.
Right.
Was that necessary? Really?
Well, what about the new Twilight Zone? There's an episode called Not All Men, and it's about an alien plague of meteorites that land and turn all men into basically just more examples of the selfish brutes that they all are, right? Yep. It was of course written and directed by women, and I'm like, really? This is what you're going to do? I understand, but again, I've always said you cannot trade one oppression for another.
Agreed.
We all go back far enough in time, and there's enough oppression. The Chinese should hate the Japanese forever for World War II, forever. But we all have to move forward. Human history is a charnel house. It is a litany of horrors perpetrated from one person to another. But we don't have to be that way, and we have to go forward together. And if you're going to trade one oppression for another, and by the way, it was interesting watching the Quentin Tarantino press conference at Cannes.
Okay.
And it was really interesting, all these interesting questions. And of course, a woman, let's just say a very New York hipster woman, she just looked New York. I'm going to be prejudicial right now. She looked like a New York reporter. Her question is, you really didn't you got Margot Robbie, an Oscar-nominated actress. You really didn't give her a lot to say. She doesn't have as much dialogue as the men do. And it's like, really? At the press conference, you're going to ask that question? And Quentin Tarantino's, his answer was, I reject your hypothesis. And that's all it said. And I'm like, for a woman, this woman wanted to make a press conference about this film that got made, that you've got these incredible actors, and she wanted to turn it into some political screed about the fact that Margot Robbie, who, by the way, chose to take this role to work with Quentin Tarantino, like she, as if she was just bamboozled by Quentin Tarantino and she actually had a great answer, but she was able to answer. But you listen to this and you're like, this is the world we live in.
I'm gonna have to
what about the fact that you celebrate this artist who's delivered films since the early 90s, who's an important filmmaker, who's an Oscar winner, who's given us a movie about this particular time, doesn't ask about the evocation of the period, doesn't ask about the Tate LaBianca murders, doesn't ask about how did you feel? No, the fact that she didn't talk very much. Because you're a man and you wrote it that way. This coming from the guy who brought back Pam Grier's career and Jackie Brown, who made two movies with Uma Thurman front and center as an action star and a mother.
Yep. And
this woman wants to, because in this day and age, let's try and pillory Quentin Tarantino for not being woke. It's like, you know what? Fuck you. If you're not going to add to the cultural discussion about this, and you're going to take your own political agenda and try and shoehorn it into a press conference at Cannes, you deserve to get shut down. It's disrespectful.
Agreed.
And that's another thing, man. John, where's the respect we have for our our fellow man?
Common decency.
You know, where's the
Yes.
respect we have for our teachers
Yes.
and our parents?
Yeah.
And where's the respect we should have for college professors who work at Yale and Princeton and people who've been there for a long time, who've published, who've been around the world? Why aren't we respecting these people? Why are we having people that go to college and go, I don't like this safe space and I want to fire you because you – I mean, there is a professor, a black professor, I don't know if it was at Harvard or Yale, who is defending Harvey Weinstein.
Yes, I heard you talk about this. Yeah.
That's his job,
Right?
And
As a lawyer, yes.
He was the I don't know what it's called when he was running a one of the houses at one of these Ivy League schools.
Yes.
I forget.
Yeah.
Princeton or Yale. And suddenly all the women are coming out, not just women but men are coming out. I don't feel safe that he's now defending Harvey Weinstein. You're like, what? You don't believe in due process?
Exactly.
You don't believe in our laws? And by the way, it's his job.
Right.
That's what a lawyer does. He doesn't just take cases that he wants to take. You know, it's like lawyers aren't about social justice. They're trying to defend their clients because that's what every single person is due under our laws. They get due process.
That's right.
And you look at college students, like this guy had to leave. Him and his wife had to leave. I mean, this is a
the Halloween
respect
costume thing. Yeah.
And this is a different thing than that. The Halloween costume thing is different. This is a new thing. I just saw, and it's like, you know, it makes me angry because it's like, why would you feel unsafe if a lawyer is defending his client? What does that have to do with you?
Yes. Well, like you said, it's social media, Rob. Everything, I know, because now our words, our most mundane thoughts are now in print, and people, you know, as I always used to tell the comic creators that would get angry at the talkback at websites like Newsarama and things like that. I'm like, you're not going to win an argument with Vader 28. Okay, Vader 28's going to hide behind his avatar, shout at the world, think he knows, you know. And again, I'm like, this might be an 11-year-old kid that you're trying to reason with.
But you know what's,
go on. Well,
what's interesting at this moment, rather than the students demanding the removal of this professor, shouldn't they be, as students at an Ivy League college, asking this gentleman to sit down,
right,
and have a conversation and talk about why are you doing this and what do you think? What message are you sending to us as students? You're in an Ivy League school where you have this man who has an incredible career, is a very esteemed lawyer. And rather than respect what he's doing and respect the American justice system and learn from what he might have to tell you, they get up and start making social media posts and videos, getting on their high horse and getting him removed.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's like, why? And then the schools allow it.
No, you're right. Yes. I was going to say Al Cap, the Little Abner creator, cartoonist, went from being a very liberal guy in the 40s and 50s. And he was kind of turned off by the hippie generation. So he would start showing up at colleges and challenging the youth culture on their beliefs. And he's like, all this free love crap and drugs, you kids don't really appreciate a real liberal point of view. And again, that was great because then you had this dialogue and everything. And you're right. I think there's that opportunity to even say, how can you do this? I think that's brilliant. Yeah, let's have a conversation about this because, again, you're only going to learn by sitting down and understanding. And like you said, have respect for the other side, but come with the same passion of, we don't understand this. This to us seems offensive that you would choose to do this. Why is this happening? Those are valid questions, but not to the point of exclusion. Yeah.
No, and by the way, no doubt, Harvey Weinstein's a piece of shit. Yeah. He's a scumbag. I didn't even like how he edited movies. The guy's a total scumbag. You listen to the accounts of what he did. He is a scumbag.
Totally.
But you know what? I would like to have a lawyer on my side who's gone through the process of having to defend a scumbag. If I was in a situation where nobody believed me, if somebody found me in a hotel room with a dead prostitute and my fingerprints all over everything, and I was holding a bloody knife and I didn't remember how I got there. And I would like to have Yeah, exactly. Wolf in the Fold. There you go. All the way back to Star Trek. All the way back to Star Trek. Scotty's holding a knife. There's literally a dead, not a prostitute, but a dead woman, and he has no idea what happened. And that's funny. I went right to a Star Trek example, not even knowing. But it was true. I was wolf in the folded. I was folded like a wolf. Instead of hungry like a wolf, I was folded like a wolf. I would want the guy from Harvard. I think it's Harvard. I believe it's Harvard. I would want the professor from Harvard, the lawyer from Harvard who defended Harvey Weinstein to come to my rescue. And, rather than run him out of college, here you have a resource at the university that you've tried. How long did you dream of getting into this college? How long did you work hard in school to get into this college? And now you're going to pillory the very professors that you wanted to learn from? And scream and say, I don't feel safe. How do you not feel safe? You know what? I'd feel much safer if I had a lawyer who was willing to do this, because that guy knows Harvey Weinstein's a scumbag, but believes in the rule of law. And he believes in the United States justice system. And you might not know that one day you might be in a situation where nobody believes you, except this guy will come to your defense and no one else would have. Why not learn from that guy? You're in college. Rather than get on your high horse because you don't know anything and scream and bitch and moan and complain and demand he get removed, why not sit him down and go, what's it like, man?
Yeah.
What's it like to have to do this? As a lawyer, how are you going to mount your defense? How do you live with yourself?
Right.
Ask him the questions.
All valid questions.
Learn.
Yes.
I mean, and what's so funny is he's living in the same dorm or whatever it's called, the house.
Yeah.
He's the master of the house. You can knock on his door and say, listen, man, bring him a bottle of wine. Can I sit down and talk to you about this? Obviously, you can't reveal anything about the case, but I need to learn from you, because if I graduate from Harvard Law and I have to defend a scumbag like Harvey Weinstein, I want to know, how do you live with yourself?
Sure. I mean, yeah.
Wouldn't that be what you want?
Well, yeah. Again, and where's the parent that can step in and say, hey, listen, I don't know, man. And again, this is where our ages are showing, and we are not growing up in the same. Our level of social media has come late enough in life where our brains are already set, and a lot of these kids are wired differently because of the environment that they grew up in, and I don't mean that in any disparaging way. That's just a fact. And just like our grandparents lived at a much slower pace than we did. And I mean, again, this is what, as I always say, it's not wisdom that you get as you get older. It's experience and perspective. And that's really what it is. It's just like, this is what we see, 30 years down the line from you guys. I mean, I don't know.
When the aliens come and the heat rays are flying overhead, it doesn't matter how woke you are, man. It really doesn't. If you have somebody removed from your dorm at Harvard when the heat rays are flying and your friends are getting fried, it ain't going to help you.
I hear you, man. You're killing me. All right, I'm going to let you go because we.
All right, this has been a lot of fun.
Hey, seriously, Rob, you're a champ for doing it as long as we did, and it's always a pleasure. And
dude, 3 hours, man.
I know, but you see, well, and honestly, it was so great when you did promote Wordballoon, and you noticed that me and John Price and Larry Young had our discovery conversation. And
it was great too.
And I'm really glad you listened, man. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I love both of those guys.
They're hilarious. No, they're great guys. And again, I really appreciate their points of view. And I think Larry was the first guy that attracted me to John Price because he would repost his Medium articles, and they were just very clear-headed. And so it was a real pleasure talking to John. And as always, a pleasure talking to you. And continued success, man. Seriously, I'm thrilled that you are pursuing your dreams. And that, you're getting to do what you want to do. And again, I think we're the ones that are taking advantage of the way things are in social media, and also as technology progresses, that we can pursue our ideas. And again, without the gatekeepers. And I think that's important. So keep it up.
Right. And, that doesn't mean, I think the important thing is to recognize the sovereignty of the individual, that every person that you meet, as I always say, has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And I think it's worth hearing those stories, and it's worth respecting those people that you might not have something in common with, or you might not even speak the same language. But, if we come from a baseline that we are all human beings on this planet and we all want to move forward and have a good life together, we're stronger together than apart.
Agreed. And
at the end of the day, all of the diversity in the world makes us stronger. The stories are better. And I just think we'll lead a better life if we're more accepting, we're more open to everyone else.
Well, that's the key. More voices, but make sure you hear those voices, and make sure you do really listen to all voices, because
that's right.
Yeah, I'm with you.
That's
man.
right.
No,
all voices.
Yep. No, a pleasure, man. Honestly, as always. Thank you. Robservations on YouTube. Very easy to find. Part of the Burnett network. And, of course, also Rob makes like 5 day a week, at least, appearances on John Campia's show on YouTube. And Inglorious Trexperts, a fantastic podcast where Rob and his buddy Mark Altman and others get together and discuss all things Star Trek. And I'm impressed, because even Disco, even what's her face's Discovery show,
Chase Masterson,
Chase Masterson is taking the summer off. And it's like, hey, come on, man. You can talk about Star Trek, as we do, ad infinitum, for Christ's sake.
Yes, you can.
So
yes, and also John Campy and I and Olympic gold medalist Cody Miller have our best movie, worst movie podcast as well.
That out, man. Absolutely. No.
You'll like it. It's pretty fun. It's quick, too. It's less than an hour.
Well, thank you for the marathon. And truly, it's always a pleasure. And, 6 months to a year. Let's check in either mid-Picard or post-Picard. And
this was fantastic.
There we go. I'll leave it right there. Thanks, Rob. That was great, man.
All right, man.
Hilarious. Robert Meyer Burnett. Check out his Robservations on YouTube. It's part of the Burnett work, as he likes to call it. And very funny stuff, 7 days a week. Not just Star Trek Discovery frustrations, but a wide range of topics. And again, Rob is a longtime geek, is a massive movie hound and television hound and reader. And as you can tell from this conversation, a wide range of knowledge about a lot of great movies, television, and books. And I enjoy his opinions. That's why I enjoy watching him, supporting his show, and certainly having him back on Word Balloon. I look forward to our next conversation, and I hope you like today's show as well. It was all brought to you by the League of Word Balloon listeners. Subscribing to Word Balloon via Patreon. If you like what you hear and want to help out the cause, is Word Balloon worth $1 a month to you? Is it worth the price of a comic book a month? If you think so, and you want to help me out, you can go to wordballoon.com and click on the Patreon ad, or go to patreon.com/wordballoon. Thank you, League of Word Balloon listeners. Word Balloon is also brought to you by Aftershock Comics, who are just taking control of 2019 as the year of reading dangerously. Great books, man. I'll tell you, I really enjoyed the debut of Descendant last month from Stephanie Phillips, Killer Groove, which just came out last week from Ollie Masters and Owen Marin. And then there are things like my buddy Tim Seeley's book Dark Red, which is about a vampire living in rural America. Oberon, a new supernatural series from Ryan Parrott. Stronghold from my buddy Phil Hester and Ryan Kelly. And then also great stuff like Donnie Cates' Baby Teeth, Marguerite Bennett's Animosity, and so many Garth Ennis books, including A Walk Through Hell, Jimmy's Bastards, and Out of the Blue. In the weeks ahead, we'll be talking to more Aftershock creators about their books, but you don't have to wait. You'll find full story descriptions, preview pages, and the diamond codes on these books to order through your local shop at AftershockComics.com. Thanks again for listening today. More great Word Balloons to come. June has just begun. We've already got 3 episodes in the can, and if you haven't listened to them already, you really need to check out my great conversations with Joe Henderson, co-showrunner of Lucifer, Season 4 on Netflix, and also my buddy Jason Inman, who just wrote a great comic essay book called Super Soldiers, and it's a great look at how comic books and comic strips handle the military. Characters that have military backgrounds, what do they get right? What do they get wrong? Jason should know. He is a former military man that served and helped protect us during the Iraqi war of the early 2000s. A very amazing story, and if you haven't listened to it yet, Jason talks about that, and we can't help it. We talk about some of the other geek things that we like. Jason also involved with television, working on The Code, the CBS military court drama that just wrapped up its first season. So neat stuff, man. And I'm really happy with where Jason's writing career is going. He and his wife, Ashley Robinson, have been coming up with some great comic books as well, like Jupiter Jet and Science, as I like to say, because I'm a Thomas Dolby fan. So those are the other 2 June episodes that just debuted. I hope you'll check them out. Until next time, Word Balloon is a copyright feature of Shaky Productions, copyright 2019.